Hi, I got a haircut. I find everything about literature fascinating. I love reading it. I love talking about it. That's a lot of why I made this channel. Well, really, it's the exclusive reason why I made this channel. And one of the things that I've recently kind of been locked into thinking about and haven't been able to escape are the popular YA book series of my childhood. When I was growing up, there were these book series that were come about that were seemingly unstoppable. Everybody read them, everybody knew about them, everybody waited for the movie releases. They were these huge phenomenons. There are plenty of examples of this, right? Twilight, The Hunger Games, Percy Jackson. Book series that literally everybody read. Adults, children, didn't matter. And I don't know if I'm just out of touch. I don't know if it's because I don't have kids and I'm in that in-between age, but I just feel like that's not really happening anymore. These YA book series took over the world, and I can't think of one since basically Divergent to be as popular as these book series were. So I thought it would be fun to start kind of going through them one by one, rereading them as an adult, and deep diving into why I think they were so successful, both from a literary perspective and from a pop culture perspective. And also just kind of analyze them. So that's what we're going to be doing today, starting with The Hunger Games. Now, I started with The Hunger Games very intentionally because the new movie's coming out, so this is going to be a plot summary and analysis. So if you're just here for the plot summary, I'll put chapters down in the description so you know exactly where to go in the video, so you can see exactly what you want to see. But if you're just as curious as I am about why these book series were so popular and why they don't seem to really come about anymore, then just watch the video all the way through. Also, hi, I'm Meredith. I don't know if I introduced myself. Welcome to my channel. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to stick around, subscribe, you know? And with that, let's dive in. The Hunger Games is a dystopian YA trilogy that now has a prequel that came out a few years ago that was written by Suzanne Collins. I think the why in why an author wrote a book is such an important piece of the analysis, so that's what we're going to start with. We're going to start with talking about like why Suzanne Collins wrote The Hunger Games. In an interview with the New York Times, Suzanne Collins talks about how she's fascinated with the idea of a just war, essentially. So like that question of what justifies war, and, you know, since war typically involves actions like murder and like destruction of property, which feels kind of silly to say after murder, it's kind of like this question of, you know, since those are unethical acts, are there like ethical reasons why one could commit those acts? Which, if you're a subscriber and you watched my Les Mis video, then you would know Les Mis is about the same thing. That was maybe my biggest shock. Like when I started these series, I was like, I was not expecting it to parallel Les Mis so much, but when we actually dive into the analysis, there's a lot of really scary parallels. Only a little bit though. We're not going to go too in depth into that, but very similar motivations. So again, that big question, what justifies war? Is there anything that justifies war? Collins argues that any sane person reading her novel would say that the citizens of Panem absolutely do have a right to rebel. I couldn't agree more. This government sucks. We'll get into the premise in a minute, but for now, just know it's pretty messed up. So her goal in writing The Hunger Games was to introduce this idea and explore it in a way that was digestible for young audiences. It's partially based off of the Greek myth of Theseus and the Minotaur, and also based off of her real life experiences as the daughter of an Air Force veteran, where she moved around the world and saw many different places that were kind of directly impacted by the negative effects of war. So she was introduced to that idea at a very young age, right? And so she kind of combines that with this Greek myth to create this story where she can maybe help other children understand and digest this idea. She also wrote a series before The Hunger Games called The Underland Chronicles, which was another YA series where she talked about very similar themes. Now, I have to say, I'm only going off the titles. I'm only going off of like the titles and the covers and the descriptions of the books. I have not actually read The Underland Chronicles, but it did feel to me like it was directed towards a much younger audience, maybe like grade school age, whereas Hunger Games has always kind of felt like it was directed more towards that like pre-teen/teen audience. That is strictly off vibes though. I have not read those books. I want to be very clear about that. She also has a ton of experience on children's TV, like writing children's TV shows, so she just really seems very equipped to deliver things to a young audience. I am not gonna lie to you. I have my laptop here with my little scripty, and I accidentally like clicked a button and it switched to the other Word document I have open, which is a sex scene that I wrote for my book. And so I just looked down and almost just like read a line from it. So, as with any book, the premise is slow released in the early chapters through a process called exposition. But I learned in my last video that like doing a plot recap, it can be really hard to deliver the premise in the way that it's like revealed, and also is kind of pointless. Like the premise of the book is revealed over the course of the first like chapter or two. So I'm just going to take a second here and talk about the actual premise of the Hunger Games, like outside of the plot, and then we'll talk about how the plot goes down. In Suzanne Collins' own words, in a dystopian future, the totalitarian nation of Panem is divided into 12 districts and the capital. Each year, 2 young representatives from each district are selected by lottery to participate in the Hunger Games. Part entertainment, part brutal retribution for a past rebellion, the televised games are broadcast throughout Panem. The 24 participants are forced to eliminate their competitors, while the citizens of Panem are required to watch. So you got 12 districts, each sends 2 tributes under the age of 18 every year, and they fight to the death. So I looked up a map of the districts, and I shit you not, this is when I learned that this is supposed to be in like a post-apocalyptic America. Yeah, I had no idea. I read these books as a kid. Literally didn't remember that. Fully this entire time thought this took place in a completely different place. And I wish I could give myself the excuse of like maybe that's never mentioned in the book. It is. It is actually pretty early in too. Young Mare needed to work on her reading comprehension skills. Okay, stick with me here. I'm just going to hammer these out. So District 1 is for luxury items and jewelry. District 2 is for masonry and weapon manufacturing. District 3 is for technology. District 4 is for fishing, and they're wealthy and good looking. I put that in my notes. District 5 is power and electricity. District 6 is transportation. District 7 is lumber. District 8 is textiles. District 9 is grain. District 10 is livestock. Then District 11 is for agriculture, and District 12 is for coal mining. Now, I spat those all out, right? I don't expect you to like remember that, but then now as I like call back to the districts and I like talk about them, then we have a little bit more of like an idea, you know, I'll remind you as we go, but it's just an introduction. The only one that really matters to know right now is District 12. That's coal mining. That's probably all we need to get started. So let's dive in. Book 1 of the Hunger Games is aptly called The Hunger Games, again by Miss Suzanne Collins. This book is split into 3 parts: the tributes, the games, and the victors. So let's meet the tributes. We open on a pretty classic get ready with main character sequence where Katniss Everdeen, our heroine, is going about her morning routine, shall we say. She's doing her skincare, the whole 9 yards. Through the whole introduction process, we learn a bunch about her, so I'm just going to summarize that here. Her name is Katniss Everdeen. She's 16 years old, and she lives in District 12. That's the coal mining district. She lives with her mom and her little sister Prim, and her dad died in a coal mining accident when she was 11. Now, without her dad working in the mines, it seems her family was kind of struggling for income, and so Katniss hunts to support the family. This is all we know for now. Some of the reasoning for why will come up later. We can also sense there's some animosity between her and her mom, but again, that'll come up later. So after she gets ready for her day, she heads out into the woods. Now this was kind of interesting. It's a little tidbit that gets dropped in there. There is an electric fence that surrounds the entirety of District 12 that supposedly is there to keep the animals out. But because District 12 has electricity so little of the time, it rarely ever works, that she's usually able to just shimmy under the electric fence and get out into the woods. Through all of this, her internal monologue is letting us know that poaching is technically illegal, but no one really cares. Peacekeepers, as they're called, are kind of the police officers of this society, government, whatever you want to call it, and even they buy meat from Katniss and her friend, Gale. That's right. I dropped my pen. We meet Gale this early in. Basically comes up like page 3 or 4. I guess that's kind of foreshadowing for those of you who maybe never read the books. He's gonna end up becoming, we'll say, somewhat important. The Gale stans are coming for me. I was a Gale stan. We'll talk about that. Don't worry. I can't believe I was upon the reread, but whatever. I'm getting ahead of myself. She meets up with Gale in the woods. He's her longtime friend. They've hunted together for years. He is 18 years old. She's 16. And they're just buds. They're hunting pals. You wouldn't get it. Now, they both brought food on this hunt, some cheese and berries and stuff like that, to celebrate the reaping. Now, I use the word celebrate lightly. Neither of them are really in a good mood about the reaping being that day, as it seems all of District 12. We don't know what the reaping is yet, though. While they're sitting and munching on it. That was really weird. I don't know why I did this with my fingers. I don't eat like that, I promise. While they're sitting and very normally munching on their food, Gale randomly kind of says to Katniss, like, you know, we could just escape society. We could just run off. Society's so bad and it's terrible here, and we could run off together. And Katniss is like, what? Like, she's very confused by this offer from him. And in her internal monologue is like, why would my friend Gale, my very much friend Gale, be telling me we could run off together? What of our families? I'm sure 12 or 13-year-old me was very frustrated by this reaction and wanted her to immediately confess her love to him so they could kiss. But adult Mare actually really likes this choice. Suzanne Collins' choice, I mean. Katniss is 16. If you're reading this book as a teenager, which is the intended audience, that kind of means she's an adult. Now, reading it as an adult, her not realizing that this is a romantic proposition really puts into perspective her youth. I don't know if she did it intentionally or not, but I think it almost separates the adult audience reading this from the teen audience reading this in a way that's really cool. Because again, like, a teenager isn't even really going to notice this or think anything of it, but an adult really understands, like, this is a 16-year-old, and all of this stuff that's about to happen is happening to a 16-year-old child. And it makes me kind of happy that I did read these books as a tween/teenager and that I am rereading them now as a grown adult woman, because I do think it's a slightly different experience. It's going to be a different experience no matter what because you're different, but I wonder if there weren't some intentional choices by Suzanne Collins to make that experience different. So he's like, let's run off together. And she's like, why would we do that? And he's like, oh, time for the reaping. And it's on the walk to the reaping that, again, Katniss's internal monologue explains to us what the reaping actually is. Now, they keep loosely referencing this thing called the Hunger Games, but they haven't explained that much about it yet. But the reaping is related to the Hunger Games. And it's specifically to select the tributes that go compete in the Hunger Games. I'm just going to directly read the explanation because why not? You become eligible for the reaping the day you turn 12. That year, your name is entered once, at 13, twice, and so on until you reach the age of 18, the final year of eligibility, when your name goes into the pool 7 times. That's true for every citizen in all of the 12 districts in the entire country of Panem. So there's a bowl, and they pick a name out of it, and the number of times your name is in the bowl is based off of how old you are between the ages of 12 and 18. Once you're over the age of 18, you're not eligible anymore. Then there's a passage below it that explains the tessera process, which is an added layer to the reaping. So per the rules of Panem, everybody gets entered the amount of times for their age, but you can opt to be entered more times in exchange for grain and oil. So those who are less fortunate are going to end up entered into the reaping more times because they'll have traded essentially times to have their name entered for food. Katniss is entered this year in the reaping 20 times and Gale is entered 42 times. And then we just jump to the reaping, right? They're in the square, it's happening. It's only page 15, but we're in the story already and I'm here for it. Very opposite Les Mis in that way. It took us at least 60 pages to get to the main plot of that one. I think some of the choices that Suzanne Collins makes here for the actual process of the reaping and how it's done in each district is very heavily inspired by, hear me out, the NFL draft. That might have sounded insane, but now I have to defend myself. Now I have to explain myself to you. If you are writing about something that does not exist in our world, the easiest way to make it as realistic as you can is to model it after something that does exist in our world, and just kind of tweak the details you need to tweak. So much of how she describes like the stage setup, everything in the square, like all that stuff, it reminds me of the set for the NFL draft. And if you think about it, like selecting people to go compete in games, like that's kind of what a draft is. A sports draft, I should say. Now it's a little different, obviously, in that there's like expectations of who's going to be picked and they like know they're in the running and, you know, all that stuff. But a really core piece of this book moving forward is that the Hunger Games are treated like entertainment by the Capitol. And so instead of modeling a lot of how they pick people and all that off of other dystopian works that have had some kind of like sacrifice inspiration, a lot of the whole model of the Hunger Games is based around professional sports. So I will keep going back to this reference because I haven't spoken to Suzanne Collins herself, but I would be shocked if she didn't draw inspiration from it. All the people of District 12 are required to attend, and so they're all gathered in the square, and the people who are eligible to become a tribute are then split up by age, so the 12-year-olds are, I think, the furthest back, and then the oldest are the furthest forward, and then the stage is at the front. And this is where we meet Effie. Effie is like the Capitol's ambassador to District 12 for the games. So every year she comes to District 12, she runs the reaping, and then she takes the candidates back to the Capitol where she kind of guides them through the whole process. Effie's energy, very different from anybody else here right now. She's upbeat, she's the host, she's ready for us all to enjoy the reaping of the 74th Hunger Games.
Happy Hunger Games! And may the odds be ever in your favor.
What are the Hunger Games? Fair question. Effie gives a whole history. The Hunger Games are meant to be a form of retribution for a failed rebellion. The citizens of Panem had rebelled against the government about 74 years ago and had gotten completely destroyed in the war. In retaliation, the Capitol set up this thing called the Hunger Games, where each district has to send 2 teenagers to fight to the death. They have a boy tribute and a girl tribute, and they go to the Capitol. Then they fight to the death. You know, the usual teenage stuff. This is all fun and games to the Capitol. They're excited about it. They think it's fun. They try to turn it into this whole sporting event. It's pretty safe to say the citizens of Panem, who have to offer their children up for sacrifice every year, don't agree. But we get all this preamble, we get this introduction from Effie, and then it's just straight into it. Let's pick the tributes. They pick the girl first, and Effie reaches her hand into the bowl and pulls out a name. Primrose Everdeen. If you were paying attention, you would know Prim is Katniss's sister. She's 12 years old, it was her first year in the reaping, and her name was only in the bowl one time. Katniss is obviously horrified, grief-stricken, shocked, going through all of the emotions you could experience at once. And as Prim is walking to the stage, Katniss rushes forward and volunteers.
Prim! Prim! I volunteer! I volunteer as tribute! I believe we have a volunteer.
I cannot begin to describe the sheer volume of I volunteer as tribute memes that existed around the time the movie came out specifically. They mention at this point that the wealthier districts like District 1 and District 2 have people they call careers who have essentially trained their whole lives to compete in the games. It was everywhere. So anyway, Katniss volunteers, and Effie is thrilled about this because they pretty much never have volunteers in District 12. Katniss did not do so because she wants to compete in the games. She did so to save her sister. Okay. I'm a little brighter now. So I'll reiterate, and I'm going to exhaust this point to death, that from the Capitol's perspective, this is a time for celebration. And typically the crowd begrudgingly applauds the tribute. Not this time. District 12 is completely silent. It's the opposite of the everybody clapped meme. Instead, they do this. And they hold out their 3 fingers, more up, but I'm limited by the camera frame. Again, I cannot stress enough the people who did this, I don't know why it bothers me so much in hindsight. Maybe because I was in school at the time these were coming out, and so you just see people walking down the hallways and they would do this to their friends. I mean, I don't know why I thought it was cringe. I was the cringiest bitch on the planet, so I have literally no right to judge anybody else for what they did in middle school, and yet here I am doing just that. That's why I'm saying, I know, Twilight has really stood the test of time and the impact it had, but I feel like Hunger Games almost stayed contained to the time it was being released, and not a lot of people talk about just how popular it was, especially amongst teenagers. That all said and done, now they have to pick the boy. And what name do they draw? But Peeta Mellark. And thus begins a love triangle that rivals the like of Jacob and Edward. And Bella, but she was the least important part. I actually feel like Katniss is a little more involved in this love triangle than Bella ever was in the one in Twilight. So as Peeta is walking to the stage, we get a bit of an introduction to him, but strictly through Katniss's eyes and what she knows about him. She's pretty upset that he's the tribute chosen, but not because they're close or friends or anything. It's because she feels like she owes him. She immediately recognizes that this guy is going to end up being competition for her, right? They're going to end up fighting in the arena. Only one person can survive. But Peeta kind of saved her life. And this is when we get the deep dive into her dad's death and what happened. So he was killed in a mining accident, and her family was granted a grieving time in which they were provided money by the government to live off of. But it was very short. If my memory serves, like 3 months. I didn't write it down. And her mom was not really in the emotional state to go back to work when the grieving period ended. So her mom, clearly suffering from severe mental illness, did not really go back to work, and their family was really struggling. Katniss was a few months away from turning 12, so she didn't have a tessera. That's where you put your name in the bowl more times to get food. She keeps thinking to herself, we just have to find a way to survive until then. If we can survive until then I can just put my name in the bowl a few times, once per family member, and get enough food for us for the year. She doesn't know how to do this, and she's growing increasingly weaker as she goes longer and longer between meals. She's walking around, suffering from the effects of starvation, and rooting through trash cans trying to find food when she gets to the baker's house. She goes to see if they have any bread that didn't turn out well, that was thrown away, and finds the trash can empty. The baker's wife comes running out of the store, chasing her away with a spoon, yelling at her for going through their trash. At some point all of this, she kind of makes eye contact with the son of the bakers. She then sits down on the side of the road. She's completely defeated. She has no idea what to do. She's feeling very hopeless. Then she hears quite the commotion, some hitting, some yelling coming from the bakery. And the boy comes running out with a clear mark on his face and 2 loaves of burnt bread. Instead of throwing them into the trash can, he throws them at her feet and goes back inside. She runs home, shares the bread with her mom and sister. The little bit of food gives her the energy she needs to keep considering what their options are. She sees the boy the next day at school and a daisy on the ground, and remembers that there's this daisy patch outside of the fence that her dad used to go to pick the daisies, and you could cook them into a soup or something, or like eat some piece of it. So she goes and does that, and this is kind of the beginning of her starting to hunt outside of the fence. From that point on, she becomes very adept with bows and arrows, and that's how she supports the family. Now we learn essentially 2 things here. We learn why she has such an animosity for her mother. She feels very abandoned by her. She feels like she wasn't there for her in this time. And the baker's son is Peeta. Katniss now has a lot of mixed emotions. She feels very indebted to this boy. She's never thanked him. She's never even really talked to him. But she feels like she owes him her life. And now she's about to be thrown into an arena where if she wants to survive, she has to take his life. Crazy pants. The other thing I'll say, and the thing I really, really like about all of this, is that I love how believable it is that Katniss would actually be quite the competitor in the Hunger Games. She's very smart, she's great at survival, and she's good with bow and arrows. There are so many times, especially in YA literature, where the main character is like just some ordinary person they plucked off the street, put into a situation, and they're like magically this amazing fighter. Or they have this like deep down like magic that was always there. They're like a chosen one of some kind. I think the reason a lot of YA authors make this choice is because it makes the character relatable to the reader. If you're just a kid sitting in your house in the year 2023, you're probably not that adept at like survival of the fittest kind of situations, you know what I mean? So showing somebody with no inherent survival skills surviving some grand event allows for self-insert from teens reading the book. I realize I've been calling her Suzanne up to this point. I think they usually call authors by their last names. I don't know why I'm pretending like I know her or we're friends. Collins gets around this by doing the same thing, taking a regular person, but putting them into a circumstance where they would have had to learn survival skills significantly earlier in their timeline. So by the time the reader finds them, they're very adept with survival skills, but it's still somewhat believable that you, the reader, could have been that person if you had been put in the same situation as her, young in your life. There's nothing inherently special about her. It is just the circumstance, but the circumstances have been going on for a while. I don't know, I appreciate it as an adult reader that I could believe that Katniss would win these Hunger Games, you know? So anyway, with both the tributes chosen and the main characters for the book established, they are then ushered into the mayor's house to say goodbye to their families. We get a lot of heartfelt and tear-jerky goodbyes, and then they're ushered onto a train. Haymitch is one of the 2 people from District 12 to have ever won the Hunger Games, and he is the only surviving winner. So, by default, he is the sponsor for the further tributes. However, Haymitch is a drunk. He's also played by Woody Harrelson. He trains them, and he also negotiates sponsors for them from outside of the games. So while the games are going on, people can send them gifts and things they need to survive. All of that is going to be negotiated through Haymitch. So Katniss and Peeta pretty quickly prove themselves to him so that he's actually supportive of them, and he agrees that as long as they don't get in the way of his drinking, he will actually try to help them survive. We get a lot of time with them on the train, and it's mainly Katniss kind of emotionally dealing with everything that's going on. We're introduced to the concept of an Avox, and I am again just going to read it straight out of the book because I think it's better that way. A girl comes in to serve the dinner, and Katniss says to her, "Oh, I think I know you," and everybody's like horrified by her saying this. And then Haymitch says she's an Avox, and Katniss is like, "What's an Avox?" And he says, "Someone who committed a crime. They cut her tongue so she can't speak. She's probably a traitor of some sort. Not likely you'd know her." Peeta covers for her by saying that she really looks like a girl they went to school with, and Katniss is like, "Oh, you're totally right. That is who I was thinking of." Except it's not. Katniss really does know this girl. Remember that Katniss used to poach illegally outside of District 12, and at some point she randomly saw this girl running with a boy away from something. She didn't know the girl, she didn't know the boy, neither of them were from District 12. But she hid because she had no idea what they were running from. While she was hiding, the boy got killed and the girl got sucked up by a hovercraft. She's also aware of the fact that the girl saw her hiding and seemed to be pleading with her eyes for help, and Katniss did nothing to help her. So Katniss is again carrying a lot of guilt here for a few different reasons. She still feels guilty for having not helped the girl, and especially now that she found out what happened to her. She also again feels like the ways she owes Peeta are just stacking up. Here he is again helping her out for seemingly no reason. They are competitors after all. Peeta also seems to know a lot about Katniss, when they're discussing their skills with Haymitch and stuff like that. Peeta knows a lot about her skills with archery and very much talks her up to Haymitch. All of this very confusing to Katniss, and again, further emphasizing just how young she really is. Through this whole process, Katniss is really oblivious. She has no idea why Peeta is doing this, but it's foreshadowing for us, the readers. Haymitch tells them the strategy is to appear everywhere together. Everywhere they're allowed to go together, they go together. They stay together at all the events, and they look like they're friends and like they're buddy-buddy. And they arrive at the Capitol. First, we get a makeover scene, and it might be my favorite makeover scene I've read. It's not meant to be she's not like other girls, she's different, she doesn't care about her looks, she's just naturally beautiful. That's not the vibe at all. The purpose of this makeover, in my opinion, is to show the difference between Katniss and the people at the Capitol. Katniss has never worried about any of this. Katniss has been worried about feeding herself and her family. Katniss doesn't fight them at all while they're doing all the makeover stuff, though, because Haymitch was like, do not fight them, just let them do whatever they want and don't fight back. So even though she's really uncomfortable with a lot of what they're doing, she allows it. Haymitch also, I can't remember if I mentioned this up to this point, but Haymitch tells Peeta and Katniss to go everywhere together and pretend like they're besties. So then they need to get dressed up for the ceremony, and this part was really confusing to me because Katniss is butt naked. She's just been waxed head to toe, her hair's been fixed up, her skin's been fixed up, she's a whole new person. And Cinna walks in. Cinna is her stylist. And he circles her, and he looks her up and down, and he's like, yeah, this'll do. And then he pulls out a pre-made dress. This part confused the shit out of me. Why was he checking her out naked if he already had the dress made? I think it's meant to kind of further that idea that she's just a thing to be watched and not a human, but it's interesting that it's Cinna doing that because Cinna then very much becomes an ally of Katniss's. I'm not really sure what Collins was trying to do here. Maybe show that even the people in her corner somewhat see her as an animal, but that's the best justification I could come up with for this. So anyway, they have to go do this whole parade introduction basically. So Cinna gets her all dressed up in this dress that he lights on fire. In the book, she's just got a crown that's lit on fire and a piece of her cape is lit on fire, and so she's genuinely just burning the whole time. But in my memory, in the movie, there's a point where the fire kind of ripples down and the dress actually changes. I guess I'll see if my memory's correct and you'll see because I'll put clips in editing. I didn't rewatch the movie, and for some reason that feels like a bridge too far. This is quite enough work already. Her and Peeta hold hands the whole time they're out on the parade, and it seems like everybody in the Capitol is really cheering for them, and so they feel like they did a good job. Then they start the training. All of the tributes, of which there are 24, 2 from the 12 districts, they're put together in this one big training room where there's a bunch of different areas where you can go learn different things. Haymitch gives them really specific advice. He tells them not to train the things they're good at. The goal here is obviously to hide what their skills are from the other tributes. This is not the method that most of the tributes go for, and they see a lot of them practicing their battle skills and things like that, things they're really, really good at. Remember, some of these tributes have been training to be a tribute for their whole life. Peeta and Katniss stick to Haymitch's directions, and they don't do anything that either of them are really, really good at. Peeta is very strong, Katniss is good with a bow and arrow. And instead, they go around and learn a bunch of different things about like what berries to eat and not eat and how to camouflage themselves. Peeta turns out to be really good at camouflage. This is something they emphasize. Is that going to come back up later? Who's to say? Now, remember, this is supposed to be entertainment. So they don't film at all in the training facility, probably to keep some things hidden and keep some suspense for the games. But people bet on the games. So they need to have some idea of who to bet on and where to begin. So there are these people called the Game Makers, and basically each tribute goes in and shows their skills to the Game Makers, and then the Game Makers rate them on a scale of 1 to 12, I think, probably based off the districts. The higher a score you get, the more likely you are to win the games, in their opinion. Now you may be thinking, why on earth would Katniss and Peeta care if people bet on them? They don't, but they care if people sponsor them. Now, the sponsors give money to provide life-saving equipment a lot of the time to the tributes. People want to invest in the winner. They want to be able to say they sponsored the winner. Again, the actual sporting comparisons are insane. The sports betting, right? The fact that winning teams get more sponsors, all that. So it is actually very important to them that they give on a good performance. However, by the time they get to District 12, because they go in order of the districts, the Game Makers are completely distracted. They're kind of drunk. They're not even really watching. Peeta went in by himself, so Katniss has no idea at this point, like, what he did while he was in there. She goes in. She's shooting her arrow around. She's kind of nailing it. She's doing a great job. But nobody's paying attention to her. So what does she do? She fires an arrow through the apple that's sitting in the mouth of the giant hog that the Game Makers are eating. That's right. She fired her arrow at them, perfectly spears the apple, spears it into the wall, and then says, "Thank you for your consideration," bows, and walks out of the room. Well, we know one thing. She's got gusto. She's obviously horrified by her own behavior, and she's like, oh my god, they're gonna give me a 1 and I'm gonna die in the arena, and she has a day's worth of existential dread. Then they watch the actual broadcast, and Peeta was rated an 8, and Katniss was rated an 11 out of 12. This is the highest score that anybody gets. And so obviously they're all thrilled. So honestly, everything's looking up, except that Peeta then asks to be coached separately. So up to that point, all the advice they were given was together, and they had all their meetings with Haymitch and Effie, like, together. Now Peeta wants to be by himself. This hurts Katniss's feelings, maybe more than she even wants to admit to the reader. But all they have left are the interviews, and then it's time for the games. Haymitch is trying desperately to media train Katniss, but it's not working. She clearly doesn't want to be there. She's clearly very angry at them for putting her in this situation. Not them, Haymitch and Effie, but them, like, the Capitol. Haymitch keeps just saying to her, like, literally just lie. Like, just lie. And Katniss genuinely can't do it. So Haymitch gives up. He's like, you know what, you're hopeless. You're gonna die in the arena. What am I gonna do? Then she's talking with Cinna, her stylist, before she goes out on stage. And Cinna says to her, just pretend like you're talking to me. Every question they ask you, just look at me in the audience, pretend like you're talking to me. Then you don't have to lie. Then she gets another great dress. Now this next part I found very, very interesting, specifically to do with the announcer. So they go out to do the interviews, they're live interviews, they're in front of a huge crowd, they're televised to all of Pan Am, and there's this announcer. I'll admit I don't remember his name and I didn't write it down. He's very upbeat and peppy, he's good at his job, and he seemingly is trying to help all of the tributes. Now this is through Katniss's own perception, right? She's sitting there watching him do his thing, and her interpretation of him is that he is really putting effort into making all of the tributes look really, really good. He adjusts to each of their interview styles, and his questions really do seem prompted by what they're saying, but always frame it in a positive light. The reason I find this interesting is because up to this point, there's been a very clear indication of like who is the enemy and who is a friend. There are the people who want her to survive the games and the people who don't. Then there's this announcer, and he's a neutral party, and he seems to be rooting for everybody. The reason I find this so interesting is because this is Katniss's perception of this guy. So it leads me to wonder, what impression of him are we supposed to get from Suzanne Collins, the author of the book? He ultimately is one of these capital cogs, just like Effie, just like Cinna. But as we've met these people, Effie, Cinna, and now this announcer, whose name I really should look up, give me a second. Caesar. His name is Caesar. Okay, this is definitely foreshadowing. My point was gonna be, like, I don't know if this is foreshadowing or not, but if they named him Caesar, something tells me somebody's getting stabbed in the back related to this guy in a later book. But I actually haven't read the later books yet, so I genuinely don't know. Anyway, Katniss kills her interview, of course. She's the main character. She couldn't really screw it up. But then she sits back down in her seat, and Peeta goes up for his interview. In his interview, he's talked about this unrequited love he's had for this girl for a long time. And Mr. Caesar says to him, well, if you win the games, that would probably really help your chances with her. Peeta says, it actually wouldn't help me at all. And Caesar asks him why. And Peeta says, because she came here with me. That's right, Peeta confesses his love for Miss Katniss Everdeen on national television. She had no idea this was going to happen. She's shocked, confused, blushes a ton, doesn't know how to react or sit at all, is very embarrassed. Thoughts on part 1. I found this an interesting cutoff because the next section is called the games, but we don't actually start the games for a while yet. So maybe it's just that this was supposed to be a plot twist, but it's not really that much of a plot twist. It is very much, it's heavy-handed in the foreshadowing, we'll just say. So it could just be that that's why she decided to end the section here, or there really is more of a reason on like why the next section was then chunked in with the actual games themselves. But I just thought it was interesting that the section called The Games starts not at the beginning of the Hunger Games, but actually the day before. And now on to part 2 of book 1. Hello, welcome to the Hunger Games. Oh, is my camera tilted? Yeah, it is. Hang on. Okay, we're even now. As I was thinking about how I want to represent the Hunger Games, I just kept thinking about how, like, much easier it would be if I had some kind of visual, but I thought it would be hard to do it on a corkboard the way that, like, Mike's does it. I don't know if I said his channel name right. I just thought it would be hard to represent it on a corkboard because people are, like, moving around and doing stuff, so I didn't want to be, like, pinning things down. So instead, I've mocked us out a Hunger Games here. Now, I'm obviously not very crafty. I did my best. The lake just says lake on it in huge letters. I also haven't made all the tributes, as you can tell. 11 of them die in, like, kind of the early, like, they all start around the same area and they're fighting for stuff out of the cornucopia and stuff. We'll get to all of it, don't worry. But just the important thing to establish is that 11 people die on the first day and we don't even really see their deaths, so I didn't bother making them little people representatives, you know? I've braided my hair. I was thinking like games, so I decided on like a sports jersey, right? And at least as of me filming this, the Diamondbacks have just absolutely bodied the Dodgers in the first game of the NLDS. So in honor of them and the great win they had last night, I'm wearing my Diamondbacks jersey. With all that preamble, let's dive in. Get it? Because it's the lake. Anyway, okay. So even though this section is called The Games, they don't actually start right when the games start. This actually is a choice that I don't understand. I don't know why Suzanne Collins did this. My best guess as to why is just because the games take up such a huge part of the second half of the book that if she had split it into thirds and the games had been just the games in their entirety, then the third section would have been really, really short because the parts that happen after the Hunger Games end, there's only like 2 or 3 chapters. So freed from the bounds, if you will, of making the games section actually just the games, she also included a few chapters before the games actually begin. Where we just left off, Peeta had this whole love confession and Katniss wasn't expecting it, and she's like, what is he doing? Why is he saying all this on TV? I'm so embarrassed. And she's like blushing, right? And they get off stage and she's immediately talking to Haymitch and Cinna and all them. And she's like, what is going on? Why did none of you warn me? What's happening here? And they're like, girly pop. It's all chess. It's all a genius move. We're trying to get you guys sponsors. We're trying to get you support when you're in the arena. If people think you two are madly in love, they're gonna love your love story and they're gonna want to donate. Again, just really like emphasizing how screwed up it is that like a lot of people consider these to be like real games that people like bet on and sponsor people in, right? It's so similar to sports, but just with that really gross twist of like, they will die. Most of them will die. I know people are gonna get mad at me about this pillow, so let me actually put it there. Okay. Katniss at first is pretty upset, but then once they explain why they did it, she's like, oh, okay, I understand, it's all a game. And that's my best interpretation of why Suzanne Collins picked this part to start the game sections. I think it's almost like based off of Katniss's mental state. I think this is the point where Katniss realizes that this is a game to the Capitol. So even though it's life and death for her, not only does she have to survive, but she has to play the game in order to survive. And we see this real, like, immediate shift in her. Prior to this, she's super resistant to anything that they're asking her to do regarding the actual like games part of these games. She's like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do the interviews. I don't want to do the dress up. Like, I don't care about any of this. I don't want to be doing this at all. And they have to work so hard to get her to agree to do any of that prior to this part. After this part, she herself voluntarily is kind of participating in the show aspect of the games, amping up the show of it because she realizes that the Capitol will keep her alive if she is entertaining. For Katniss, the games have begun. You see what I'm saying? You see, that's my best explanation. Anyway, from there, they're taken back. She obviously has trouble sleeping. She's trying to sleep. It's very emblematic of like anyone who has a big day and you're trying to get yourself to go to sleep and you know you need sleep to be functioning, but you're nervous, you can't sleep. We get a little bit of that. Then she wakes up, she goes to her platform, she gets a little goodbye moment with Cinna, and then it's time. So all of the tributes here are brought up on these platforms, and they're actually in a little half circle, but whatever. They come up on the platforms, and it's been made really clear to them, like prior to the game's beginning, that the platforms have all these mines around them. So if they step off of them before it's announced and the gunfire goes off to say the games have started, they'll get blown up immediately. Why would they want to step off the platform before the gun goes off, you might ask? Because of this guy right here. This is the cornucopia. It's also just a rolled up piece of paper I put a rubber band on because I actually don't own Scotch tape. And I found that out when I was trying to do this. Anybody else, like, getting into their adult life, think about, like, all the things you just had in your house as a kid that you just, like, never thought about, and then you're like, what do you mean Scotch tape doesn't just, like, come with an apartment? What are you talking about? You're telling me I have to buy that? I thought it just existed. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The cornucopia is full of all kinds of things that people would want, right? So like food, weapons, you know, sleeping bags, like warm jackets, things like that. Things that'll help keep them alive. But obviously all 24 of them are here, right? And they're all kind of in this half circle around the cornucopia. And they're all going to be going after the goodies in there. All the goodies that I put in there, clearly. I could grab some candy if I want to, but I'm lazy. I'm kind of locked in here by the microphone. As they're rising up out of these little platforms into the arena, Katniss looks around and she sees that it's all a wooded area. And there's this clearing kind of around the cornucopia with this lake, and then the rest of it is forest. So basically where you see just table is forest. She looks into the cornucopia and sees that there's a bow and arrows set, I don't know, in there. I don't know how to say that right. There's a bow and some arrows in the cornucopia. And she thinks to herself, they put that there for me. Like, they saw me shoot a bow and arrow and they know I'm good with it, and they put that there for me. And she's really, really tempted to go for it, but then she makes eye contact with Peeta, and he shakes his head, right? He's like, no, don't do it. He sees it in her eyes, and he's like, don't do it. This confuses her a little bit. She's thinking like, well, maybe PETA has a point, maybe I shouldn't do it, blah, blah, blah. Then the gun goes off and she's completely unprepared for it. So she feels like she kind of missed her opportunity to really get anything out of the cornucopia. So she's like, well, shoot, I'll just grab what I can, what's closest to me, and run. So there's like a little backpack here. She grabs it and she goes to run off. And I think, do I have it written down who it was? I don't. Great notes, Meredith. So she grabs an orange bag and she goes to run away, and someone, I forget who it was, I didn't write it down, throws a knife at her, and she actually like pulls the bag up to protect her head, and the knife goes into the bag. So now she's got a bright orange backpack and a knife. And she runs, actually I was bringing her this way, but she actually, I need to readjust, hang on. She goes this way, right? Let me gather up all my tributes here. I'm gonna move these down here when they're like irrelevant. No, I'll put them over here so we know who's still alive. Or should this be the death corner? What do you guys think? What would you prefer? It's probably better if you know who's still alive instead of who's dead. I'm gonna, oh my god, stand up. Don't do this to me. I really could have made these better, but you know. I've also, while I'm doing this, I'll just say that I marked most of them with just like what districts they're from, and then a B or a G depending on if they're the boy or girl tribute. I do hate to make this so gendered, but it is how they distinguish between them most of the time, and they don't give us most of their names because it would just be too much to remember. So that's how we'll be referring to them as well, is like the girl from this district, the boy from this district. And we'll just keep everybody over here while they're not relevant. So that doesn't mean they're all actually over there. That just means they're not in play. So PETA's over here as well too, and here's the cornucopia. So Katniss grabs her backpack. She goes this way. She runs off this way. Now she's over here. Okay. Also, shout out to someone on Reddit who actually put together a little diagram of how they thought the arena was. I based my arena map off.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
Of that. So I'll link that in the description just so you can go take a look if you want. It's a much better rendering of it than what I've made here, but bear with me. It'll get more clear as we go. I'm getting hot. Okay. We're going to be like this instead. Here's where we find out that they fire a cannon for every person who dies. So she hears 11 cannons go off. And she's like, oh, 11 people must have died in the cornucopia extravaganza. This is when we find out that they fire a cannon every time somebody dies, so that everybody in the arena knows at least that somebody dies. And then at the end of each day, they project the faces of the people who died onto like this fake sky ceiling that they have over the arena, so that all of the tributes know like who's alive and who's dead. Katniss hears 11 cannons go off and realizes that 11 people have died in the cornucopia extravaganza. She doesn't know who yet. She won't until the end of the day. She's immediately overwhelmed by the idea that PETA was one of the people who died. She has no idea where he is. She didn't wait around for him. In her mind, they're enemies now, but she obviously still cares about him, right? Oh, and my book's over there. I have to get the book to see the inventory of the bags. I was too lazy to write it all down earlier. Editing, Meredith, don't do this to yourself. Just write it down in your notes. You're not going to want to grab the book. Stop writing down page numbers for yourself. You never want to grab the book when it comes time to film. 154. The hell? Oh my god, I'm not joking when I tell you I wrote a page number down. 154. Now I'm in my book, and my book goes from 149 to 158 in the page numbers. And then it goes... Oh. It's not 158. The zeros just look like 8s. Let me show you this. Oh my god, we're so off the rails here. Does that look like a 0 to you? So I was on, so this is like 148, 149, right? Like this. And then it's, and I'm like 158. What the hell? Okay, we're obviously feeling a little unhinged today, but that's the perfect kind of day to film something like this, isn't it? So she gets one thin black sleeping bag that reflects body heat. I don't know how she knows that right away, but she does. A pack of crackers, a pack of dried beef strips, a bottle of iodine, a box of wooden matches, a small coil of wire, a pair of sunglasses, and a half-gallon plastic bottle with a cap for carrying water. But it doesn't have any water in it. It's just the bottle. Empty bottle. So she goes as far as she can during the day, but then when the night comes, she still hasn't found any water. So she's pretty thirsty, but she's like, I've got to find a safe place to camp for the night and try and get some sleep. She climbs up into a tree and she uses the sleeping bag and she like ties it into the tree and ties herself into it and all this stuff. And then she puts the bag like around her ankle and she gets in so that no one can come take things from the bag without waking her up. But she's like up in a tree, so it would be hard to see her. This is when they project the faces of all of the tributes that have died that day up onto the ceiling, so she finds out who died. So again, most of them don't have names and she refers to them as from their gender in their district, so that's how I'll be referring to them too. So it's the girl from District 3, the boy from 4, the boy from 5, both the girl and the boy from 6, both the girl and the boy from 7, the boy from 8, both the girl and the boy from 9, and the girl from 10. So those are the 11 people who have died. So she obviously notices Peeta is not one of them, and she's happy about this. She tells herself that the reason that she's happy about it is because she knows that her family will be taken care of if Peeta survives. She knows Peeta, and she knows that if she were to die, that he would use some of the riches that he gets from being the winner to take care of her family. So in her mind, the next best victor besides her is Peeta. This is her justification for why she cares, obviously. It's a book, so she can't just realize she loves him yet. Someone lights a campfire by her, and she doesn't know who. Whoever it is, an alliance of people comes up and kills them. I did not write down who it is. That's a problem. I don't know which of these tributes to knock over. But anyway, an alliance of people comes up and kills. It was a girl. It was one of the girl tributes. Who was it? Was it the girl from 4? Hang on. Jeez. Oh, all she can do is she can tell it's a girl. But it doesn't say who it is. Do we eventually find out who it is? Okay, I don't know who it is, and it doesn't say in the scene, so I'm sure it tells you later, so hopefully I wrote it down. She hears an alliance of people kill somebody, and of course magically, because we the reader needs to know who it is, she assumes who the alliance is, and is 100% correct. She's like, I bet the careers got together and formed a little squad. So that would be the boy from District 1, the girl from District 1, the boy from District 2, the girl from District 2, and I believe the girl from 4. Yeah, the girl from District 4. Okay, maybe we can play a little game of, because I know she lives, I know she lives, I know he lives.
They ask you how you are.
So it must, it must have been the girl from 8. Okay. My God, the boy from 3 does not want to stand up. Which is also actually true of his character, as we'll see later on. Alright, so through deductive reasoning we figured out the girl from 8, Dunzo. Goodbye. She assumes that this is the alliance that's formed and that they're all kind of near her in the trees. Not up in the trees. She's up in a tree. I should have made a tree. I'm sorry. But she's up in a tree and they're all down on the ground. Then they don't hear a cannon. And all of these people are like, well, we would have heard a cannon if she was actually dead, so is she not actually dead? They start kind of arguing about it. She hears all the voices. She confirmed it's exactly who she thought it was. But then someone says, oh, forget this. I'll go make sure that she's dead. And she's like, oh my God, that's Peeta. Dun dun dun! Peeta joined the alliance with all of the careers. So again, she's bundled in her little sleeping bag way up in a tree. They have no idea she's up there, but she hears this, so now she knows Peeta has formed an alliance with the enemy. And she doesn't know how she feels about it, but this is close to morning. I don't know if I mentioned that. She slept for a few hours. I think I forgot to say that. So this all happens like as dawn is breaking, so she just decides to wait for them to walk away and get out of her sleeping bag. And she truthfully doesn't know how she feels about the fact that Peeta is like in this alliance with these people. And I think part of her is just kind of like, yeah, we're all trying to survive, right? It just surprised her. But I mention this because she manages to like school her face. Like she thinks to herself, I need to pretend to be completely unbothered by this because I have no idea what the storyline is going to be. And that's where I'm saying like she really is into playing the game now. Like she's all about playing the game that the Capitol wants her to play to make the games entertaining. She's thinking about the storyline. What is the story with her and Peeta? Everybody's seen them together. Peeta's admitted he's in love with her, but now he's in this alliance with these people. And she was up in this tree and she overheard him talking with them. So if she is clearly upset when she gets down from the tree, then it's clear to the watcher that she did not know that Peeta was going to team up with them. And she's not sure she wants to send that message. She maybe wants to give the illusion that they're kind of, you know, still working together. So all of this is just very clever, and so she acts completely unbothered by the knowledge, almost to lead the audience to believe that she knew Peeta was going to do that. She's not sure if that's the play she wants to do or not, but she ends up deciding that she doesn't want to lock herself into any one play, so she kind of keeps her face neutral. She doesn't act happy, she doesn't act sad, she doesn't care that Peeta's with them, basically, according to the audience. Okay, she's way over here. We have this conglomerate of people all together now in this little squad. And then we have these people over here that we don't know where they are in the arena, right? And she keeps going this way. She keeps going, like, away from everything. And there's no water over here. As you can see from my beautifully made water, the water's only on this side of the arena. There's no water over there. Or so she thinks. Oh, wait, shoot, where's my... I need a pond. Hang on. Okay, I don't want to waste a whole other... Oh my god, I've already been recording for half an hour. Okay, I don't want to waste a whole other piece of paper, so we're just going to use this. Basically, she wanders for like... It's a full other day goes by. She hasn't had water for 36 hours, and she's actually feeling the effects of dehydration. It's really impacting her, obviously, as it would be at that point. And she collapses onto the ground. And she's thinking to herself, hey, Mitch... What the hell, man? I have to have some sponsors. Why are you not sending me a bottle of water? And then she thinks to herself, again, it's that game idea, right? She's playing the game. Hey, Mitch is playing the game. And she's thinking to herself, oh, he's probably not sending me water because I've almost found it. And then she starts crawling around on the ground, feeling around, starts to feel some mud. And there's a pond right there. She's got the iodine. She cleans the water. I'm sure Miss Suzanne Collins did her research on that, and I don't need to double check that that's actually really how you clean water. I don't care. She drinks her water and she rests for a while and everything's fine. Oh, I shouldn't move the pond. The pond stays where it is. Until a wall of fire descends. So basically it's been too long of the games without anything happening, according to the game makers, who are the people who run the Hunger Games. So they're trying to drive everybody together. So they basically started giant wildfire on this side of the forest. So now Katniss has to go this way, obviously. And she ends up getting really burned, and it's just not a great look, you know? It's just not a great situation for her. So she's running back this way. We know these people are over here somewhere, right? This side of the arena now is basically completely irrelevant. It all got burned, and now it's like basically from here over is like where the games are happening. I thought the candle would look bad just leaving it there, so we have a little, I don't know if you can see, it says fire. And that's where the fire happened.
Okay, I didn't mean to make it sound like the fire just continues. The fire does not just continue indefinitely. It's more just that now on that side of the arena, it's all burned, so they don't really ever go over there anymore. But the fire does, like, go out, and it's not still burning.
I don't know if you can see that at all. Please forgive me. This is my third YouTube video. So she runs over this way, and she reaches kind of this watery area, and she ends up sticking her leg in some water, right? Somewhere around here. Put her leg in the water. There we go. She's got her leg in the water. She's caught by this career pack, including Mr. Peeta here. Let me not turn them. So anyway, they're all kind of gathered. So she climbs up a tree. Now this part's a little, like, you have to suspend your disbelief a little bit, which is kind of a funny thing to say with this book because obviously a lot of it is very unrealistic. But she supposedly climbs 80 feet into the air in a tree. Now, for reference, right? Because distances are hard. Trust me, I have a lot of trouble with distances. The average story of an American building is about 10 feet. So 80 feet in the air is 8 stories. She climbs 8 stories into the air in a tree. And the other thing that makes it kind of unrealistic is that they say that the reason that none of the careers can follow her up the tree is because they're all way too big. These people were essentially bred and trained to do the Hunger Games, so they're all, like, huge and muscular, right? And Katniss is teeny tiny. She's a skinny little gal. They never give us an exact on her size, but she's supposedly light enough to be able to climb like 80 feet into this tree, and nobody else can follow her because they all weigh so much more than her that they would break branches that she wouldn't break. We're just gonna suspend our disbelief on that. Like I said, she's 80 feet in the air in a tree. And they're all down below. And they're like, we'll just wait for her to come down. She's got to come down eventually. She needs food. She needs water. And she is very badly burned on her leg. Sorry if you can hear that. I think my neighbor's watching football. The funny thing is I'm actually also watching football. It's Sunday. My computer's over there. But I have mine muted. So you could take notes, sir. I'm just kidding. He's allowed to listen to his TV. Just sorry if you can hear that is what I'm saying. Then Miss Rue pops out of a tree right by Katniss. Okay, so here we have Katniss, here we have Rue. And Rue pokes her head out of a tree just by Katniss and points up. And she looks up and she sees a Tracker Jacker nest. I'm sure if you read the books when you were a kid, this is all coming back to you now. So a Tracker Jacker is like a genetically engineered wasp. They're super deadly. A few of their stings will kill you, but their venom also like makes you go crazy and have like hallucinations and stuff. So even if you survive the stings, you have this like hallucinogenic effect. So she sees this Tracker Jacker nest above her and she realizes that if she cuts it down, it'll fall on the people below her. So the music starts playing and they're showing all the faces in the sky of all the people that have died because night has fallen. And she decides this is her opportunity to try and cut down the Tracker Jacker nest. However, she's really, really badly burned. And so she's having a lot of trouble really cutting through the branch. So she gives up and decides to see what she's going to do in the morning. But she doesn't have to think too much harder because Haymitch sends her some burn ointment. So she's obviously immediately very grateful. She gets this medicine, she rubs it all over her burns, and it almost immediately soothes them. Remember that this is like post-American, so the amount of technology that the whole society has is really interesting. The Capitol clearly has a lot of very advanced technology, but most of the everyday people don't even have access to the base level of technology that we have access to. So it's this really clear divide between the people of the Capitol and just the citizens of Panem and the amount of technology they have access to. So the Capitol can like genetically engineer animals and make this whole like crazy arena and has this medicine that can heal like basically anything. That's what they give Katniss, right? But as we established in our intro, Katniss doesn't even have electricity most of the time. So, just food for thought, since this is supposed to be not just plot summary, but analysis. Thought I'd, do some analysis. So Miss Katniss here sleeps through the night in her tree, soothed by the medicine. And then she gets Rue's attention right first thing in the morning. And she's like, Rue, girly pop, I'm gonna cut the Tracker Jacker nest down. Doesn't say it, but makes a motion. And Rue's like, all right, cool. And she disappears off. And now we don't know where she went again. So she's going back over here. Katniss then starts cutting down the Tracker Jacker nest. A few of them come out and are stinging her. I should have made it B-shaped, but I'm not that crafty. So a few of them come out and they're stinging her, and but she manages to cut the nest down, and it falls down on all of the careers. They're obviously like, get away. So Katniss specifically sees, right, from her vantage point in the tree, everybody runs off except for these two girls. So the girl from District 1 and the girl from District 4. They both very clearly get stung. Katniss sees it happen. The girl from District 4 does also get away with everybody else, but the girl from District 1 does not. She dies. In the arms of the angel. Katniss can't see anybody else. She doesn't know where they are. Okay? So they've all kind of just gone this way. Oh, wait. Oh, wait. We still need her. She stays dead. Katniss then gets down from the tree. And she sees this girl. We actually do know her name is Glimmer. So she sees Glimmer laying there, and she realizes she has the bow and arrows with her. Katniss is like, ooh, I want those. Let me get those from you. But she's been stung by the Tracker Jackers, so she's starting to have the hallucinogenic effect of the venom. She's trying to get the bow and arrow from Glimmer, but she can't. The hallucinations are freaking her out. She thinks Glimmer's skin is falling off. Sounds really gross. Right, okay, she's tripping out. And who shows up? But Peeta. He comes around the corner. He's also clearly been stung. He's ready to kill whoever's still here. And he sees that it's Katniss, and he just stops. And he says, what are you doing here? And she's like, I want the bow and arrow, but I can't get it. And he's like, oh my god, you're useless. But he gets the bow and arrow from Glimmer and he gives it to her, and then he basically shoves her off into the woods. And he's like, go, 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 run away, run away. And she goes, I believe, this way. Yes, she goes this way. So kind of down the river. And then as she runs away, she sees Peeta and Cato, who will become very important. So we have his name, but he's the boy from District 2. And they start fighting. What if they were kissing? Wouldn't that just be better? I just think it would be better if they all just kissed. So anyway, they start fighting. That's all she sees. And she runs off and she doesn't know what happens to really any of these people. So now they're kind of going back into our no man's land where we don't know where they are. We can get rid of Miss Girl from District 1 now. I am running out of ideas on what to do in these parts. Bye-bye. So, it's going to become relevant in a minute, so I'll just move everybody over here, that all of the careers have like a little camp over here by the lake and by the cornucopia. And Katniss finds a safe place down this way to trip out for a while. And after she comes to from her little, acid trip, she starts to really miss home, and she specifically misses Gale. Now, this is easily a moment where 12-year-old Mare would have been really frustrated with her, because it's like, Peeta just saved your life, girlfriend, and you're gonna stand over there and think about Gale. Remember, in case you've forgotten, Gale is the boy from home, right? The boy that she hunts with back home. I actually think this makes perfect sense. I think by this point in the game, she of course would be missing home, and she'd be thinking about like some of the comforts from home, Gale being one of those comforts. I think it makes perfect sense that she misses that comfort from him and that she thinks about him and home in this moment. But then she thinks to herself, well, I wonder what Gale thought of that whole thing with Peeta. I wonder what he thinks about all of this. Like, I haven't really thought about him. I wonder what he thinks. And then she stops thinking about that because she's like, that's confusing and I don't want to think about that right now. And you know what? I respect it. The shadow from the camera is getting clearer and clearer because it's getting dark outside, so I do apologize about that. That's a pretty egregious shadow, but it is what it is. I'm not figuring out a new setup at this point. Anyway, like I said, I think it makes perfect sense that Katniss would be thinking about home and like kind of seeking out things that are comforting to her in this moment. And so, yeah, she thinks about Gale, she misses Gale, and then she's like, I'm not going to think about him right now. And then she moves on. And who does she run into? But Miss Rue. Where is she? Miss Rue here. And they're like, let's form our own little alliance. Rue is like 12, and she's very much meant to be kind of an allegory for Katniss's sister, right? Katniss feels a lot of attachment to Rue because Rue reminds Katniss of her younger sister, Prim, who she's in the games to protect. And so they end up making a little alliance here. Rue also helps her like heal her Tracker Jacker stings because there's something you can like chew and put on, like a leaf you can chew and put on them that heals some of the sting. And so Rue helps her with that. While they're kind of healing and all of that and just kind of chatting, Rue tells Katniss about District 11, where Rue is from. That's the agriculture district, and it's clearly not a very great place to live. Like, as Rue is describing everything to Katniss, it's just really obvious that this is like one of the districts that's really hard to live in. I think this whole part is really just kind of gearing up for some of the stuff that happens later in the series, right? Obviously, the series takes a turn and goes in a completely different direction. I don't want to spoil anything, but I think this whole conversation is just kind of setting up. It's not just District 12 that gets kind of ignored by Pen Am. Like, a lot of people living in a lot of the districts are having really hard lives and they don't like the government. So then Katniss is like, oh my god, I slept through the night. I don't know who died. And Rue is like, don't worry, the girl from District 4 also died. Goodbye. So now we have, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 tributes left. That feels like too many. But yeah, I think that's right. Rue and Katniss then decide to mess with the careers' food. They realize that the careers don't really know how to hunt, right? Like, that doesn't really seem to be something that they're really trained to do, which is kind of crazy when you think about how, like, their whole career is supposed to be going to the Hunger Games and winning, but they didn't learn how to hunt, apparently. But this is what Suzanne Collins has decided to establish about these characters. So these people, their plan always is to just get all the food from the cornucopia and hoard it because they're the strongest. And I kid you not, I was almost like hesitant to say this because I didn't want to like almost discredit myself as like a book analyst. I'm making a whole channel where I do these deep dives and I do these book analyses, but this is when I realized, and not when I was reading it, but when I was writing my notes out from my notes in the book, this is when I realized that the entire Hunger Games is meant to be an allegory to an actual revolution. The careers are the government, and everybody else are like the people of the civilization. The careers are all kind of camped out in this one place, and they have all these food and all these resources, and what Katniss and Rue decide to do is destroy the food and resources to weaken them because they are stronger than they are. And if you look throughout history, that is commonly what ends up happening when people are revolting against the government, because the government has all the infrastructure. The government has control over like the railway lines usually, they have all the supplies, like all of the farms and crops and all that stuff that exists. Usually the government has control over that stuff. And so the people who are revolting have to, I keep hitting this, I'm sorry. The people who are revolting have to kind of hack away at those resources or else they'll never win. I think the way the whole games goes down is supposed to be emblematic of the way a revolution in and of itself would go down, where the careers are kind of like the government and then everybody else are like the people of the society. So they decide to take out the careers' food, and they come up with this whole plan where basically they're going to set these fires to lure the careers away from the food. So they're going to think, oh, somebody's nearby and they've set a fire. Let's go take them out, right? Let's go kill them. But then Rue is really, really fast. So she's just going to run from fire to fire, set a few fires. Maybe they'll eventually figure out it's a trick, but it doesn't matter because Katniss is going to be there to destroy the food. That is the plan at the very least. And they decide to make use of the Mockingjays, which I believe we went over in the intro, but if we didn't, I'll put a voiceover in here as to what a Mockingjay is. But not only did I not explain it, but it ends up becoming really, really important. So a Mockingjay is a combination between a mockingbird, which exists in the real world, and what's called a Jabberjay. So a Jabberjay was a genetically engineered bird that the Capitol created in order to spy on the rebels, but the rebels figured that out and were able to use it to spread misinformation, back to the Capitol. So then the Capitol figured that out and just kind of released all the Jabberjays into the wild, and then they mated with mockingbirds and created Mockingjays. So they're somewhat able to mimic human speech, but not perfectly, and so they mimic the songs of humans, and it becomes important because it'll later become a bit of a symbol. So I did want to make sure I came in and explained that. So they decide to use the Mockingjays to communicate with each other, and they sing a little tune to each other. They do that little tune to each other to tell each other that they're safe. Actually, let me get my football back on. Okay, the reason I went over that in so much depth is because I feel like that was part of the phenomenon. Like, I remember that, like, kind of tune being something that people kind of, like, whistled to each other. Like I said, if you weren't alive at the time, you might not understand. Like, the Hunger Games was so huge when it came out, and, like, everybody read it, and everybody saw the movies, and everybody knew all the references. And this little tune that Katniss and Rue sang to each other, like, that was one of the references that people would do. They would kind of whistle it to each other or whatever. They go to enact their plan. So Katniss sneaks up over here, and she's kind of hiding in a bush over here by the lake, and she can see their whole food stash here. We don't know where Peeta is, but he's not with them, and they're all here. So it's the boy from District 2, the girl from District 2, and the boy from District 1, and the boy from District 3 are all sitting around the cornucopia. Let me move her out of the way. Oh my god. She's not dead yet. The boy from District 2, the boy from District 3, the boy from District 1, and the girl from District 2 are all just kind of sitting around. And Katniss is squatted over here, and she's listening to them talk. And she hears them talking about Peeta. And Cato is like, yeah, okay, maybe we haven't heard the cannon go off yet, but I cut him pretty deep. There's no way he's going to survive it that much longer. We don't have to hunt him down. So Katniss is immediately worried about Peeta, but she's like, let me not think about that right now. Our plan is in action. So Rue sets her little fire over here. Voila. So Rue sets a fire and runs off. And all of the careers are like, ooh, why don't we go kill someone?
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine. They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine. They ask you how you are.
Katniss is like, that is so crazy that they just leave the food completely unattended. Why would they do that? And that's when the girl from District 5, who she calls Foxface, which I think is rude, but Foxface comes creeping out of the woods off the other side, and she's like dancing all around the food like this. She's like jumping all around it, gets to the big pile of food, grabs some food, and runs off and follows a similar path. And Katniss is like, oh my god. They replanted the landmines around the food to protect it. So she gets out her little bow and arrow and she sees a bag of apples sitting at the top. And she's like, if I just cut that bag open, it'll blow the food up. And then I don't even have to be the one to destroy it. So that's what she does. She cuts the bag open and all the apples fall down. And boom! Giant explosion. So she blows up all the food, and the careers all, like, come back, because they see the bomb go off, and they're like, holy shit, our food. And they get back over here, and Cato is pissed. And so apparently the boy from District 3 is the one who set up this plan, so Cato kills him. Just like that. So now he's dead.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine.
And then they're all, like, obviously very upset that their food's been destroyed. And Katniss is like, cool, my work here is done, and she just kind of sneaks off. This is where she digs out her night vision goggles, which I mention only because partially why I'm doing this is to prep you for the new movie coming out, and it is established that night vision goggles is something that they have access to in this world and society. That might be important, I don't know. And Rue does not show up to their rendezvous. So Katniss obviously gets worried. She's whistling. Rue is not responding. She's like, where is Rue? What's going on? She finds her, and she's over here-ish, right? This is around where she was doing the fires, and she's caught in a net. And right as Katniss arrives, yes, the boy from District 10 throws a spear and kills Rue. But she doesn't die right away. She obviously has to die slowly because it's got to be sad. So she's like in the process of dying. We'll say she's on an angle here. And Katniss comes up and is like, no, Rue, no, no, please don't die. It actually is really sad. I cried reading this. I knew it was going to happen, but I cried anyway. Katniss is obviously pissed. Well, and also she just needs to survive in general. So she immediately kills the boy from District 10. He's now dead. Oh no, it's the boy from 1, not the boy from 10. Sorry, I got that wrong. So all of this happens with the boy from District 1. He's the one that Katniss shoots the arrow through his neck and kills him. So now he's dead. So Rue asks Katniss to sing to her as she dies, and Katniss does. So she sings Rue to sleep, and it's very, very sad. And then, instead of just leaving her there, she feels like she can't. Again, remember that Rue very much reminds Katniss of her sister, and also she was kind of her ally in all of this. So she's really, really sad that she's dead. And she remembers what Peeta said about wanting to have done something to kind of prove to the Capitol that they don't own you, right? So Katniss gets a bunch of flowers and basically surrounds them around Rue so that you can't see her wound anymore, and essentially like almost like buries her, right? She doesn't actually physically bury her, but she just puts all these flowers around her to mourn her death, and then she leaves her there to get picked up by the hovercraft. And we're going to gently place Rue down because we like her. We don't want to throw her away. In the arms of the angel. But it's very, very sad. It was very sad. Is it foreshadowing? Who's to say? Then Katniss gets a gift from the sponsors, but here's the weird thing. When she opens it up, it's just a loaf of bread. And she's a little confused at first because she's like, hey, Mitch, I'm able to hunt. This whole time she's just been hunting for her food. So she's got plenty of food. Food's not the problem for her. So she's like, hey, Mitch, what the hell? Like, why would you send me bread? But then she realizes that she recognizes the bread. You see, Mr. Peeta gave her a whole bread lesson when they were still in the Capitol. And so she knows what the different breads from the different districts look like. And she recognizes this bread as bread from District 11. And she realizes that the people of District 11 pooled their funds together to send her bread. Oh my god, I'm tearing up just thinking about it. It's actually like very, very moving. It's a thank you. They send her the bread as a thank you for caring for Rue and taking care of her and burying her nicely. Oh man, I don't even know why, like, even recalling it just hits me really hard, but it's actually a very impactful moment, and I think it's one of the most important moments in this entire book for a few different reasons. The first is that it's the first example that we see in all of this of the districts actually truly working together. It's one thing for the tributes within the games to work together and have these like allies and stuff. But they're all still enemies. Like at the end of the day, only one of them can survive, and they all know that. So on some level, they're all still pitted against each other. And Katniss, in this act, has kind of shown that she does not view Rue as an enemy in that way. And District 11 has in turn showed Katniss that they are on her side, and they are rooting for her, even if she's not from their district. They also, it says in the book that it's the first time that a district has ever sent a gift to a tribute that wasn't from their district. So the gift did come from District 11, but it's so rare for that to happen where it's like District 11 sent a gift to a tribute from District 12. It's a metaphor in that way, like it's very representative of them kind of banding together against the Capitol, but I also think it's just a really big emotional moment for Katniss. She really cares for Rue. Rue kind of represents her sister to her, and it hits her really hard when Rue dies. And so I just think that like kind of getting that thank you from District 11, again, it's just that emphasis of them banding together. And I think both from like a reader perspective and from a Katniss perspective, it was very impactful. And then they make an announcement. Now let's do a little bit of a recall here. So we've got Katniss and Peeta still alive, but we don't know like where Peeta is or how hurt he is at this point. We've got both the girl and the boy from District 2. And then we've got the boy from District 10 and the girl from District 5. And they're all still alive. Oh, and the boy from District 11. I completely forgot about him. These people are all over here. We don't know where they are, right? But we do know both of these tributes are here. And then Katniss is kind of over here. Or actually, she's more down here. Oh, and I forgot I made myself a little marker for where Rue died. So this is where Rue died. Just for us to never forget. The game makers get over the loudspeaker, if that's what they call it, I don't know. And they say, hey guys, a little bit of a change in the rules. They say, actually, we can have two victors, but only if they're from the same district. So if two people from the same district survive, then you both can survive. Basically, one of you does not have to kill the other. Katniss is immediately like, oh, they must have done this because of the boy from District 2 and the girl from District 2 and then me and Peeta. So we're now going to band up in teams and fight each other. Wouldn't that be so entertaining? They're so clever. But she's also obviously very excited about this because this means that both her and Peeta can live, and she immediately sets her sights to go find Peeta. This is actually the end of this section. So this is where the games end. And now we're in a section called The Victors. So now you might see, I mean, I'll repeat myself, but now you might understand what I was saying at the beginning about it all being based off of Katniss's mindset. The sections, I mean, like where the sections split, I think are supposed to be based off of Katniss's mindset and her mental space. In the beginning, she's like, this is life and death. I can't believe people are treating this like a game. That's so silly. It's not silly, it's crazy. And then she realizes playing the game is what she has to do to survive. And then Rue dies, and she finds out that if both her and Peeta live, if they make it to the end, that they'll let them both survive. And she has this like newfound vigor to survive. So you see how I think now, again, this is all speculation. This is not confirmed. This is just my interpretation. But I think that Suzanne Collins actually named these sections after like Katniss's mental state. Like how does she see herself in that moment? So in the first section, she's a tribute. In the second section, she's in the games. And she's mentally, like in her headspace, she's in the games. And in the third section called The Victor, in her mind, now she is going to be the victor. It starts to dawn on her that it's actually very realistic that she and Peeta survive this. And she really, really sets her sights on like, we're going to live. We're going to survive. Oh, man. But I just filmed for an hour. So I'm going to get up. I'm going to take a little break. I'm going to make myself a drink. I'm going to have a little ContraPoints moment. I'm going to make myself a drink, and I'm going to come right back. I already had an open bottle of Prosecco, so I just went with a glass of that instead of putting in the effort to make a whole drink. Anyway, we'll just put that down there. Basically, Katniss has just found out that her and Peeta can band together in a team. So now she's like, I gotta go find Peeta. So what does she do? She goes back to the Tracker Jacker nest because that's where she last saw him. Then she uses deductive reasoning to figure out where he went. And she ends up finding him. It's a book, okay? She ends up finding him pretty quickly. And he's over here. And he's actually laying, he's laying like in the lake. You know, he's not dead. But he's used his camouflage skill. She comes over here and she's like looking for him and she can't find him and she's freaking out. She's like, maybe he did die. And then he's like, hey, don't step on me. And she's like, what the fuck? And she looks down and he's like laying in the mud. He's camouflaged himself super well. He's absolutely covered in mud, and he's apparently just been laying there 4 days covered in mud. Now, this is where we'll have to just suspend our disbelief a little bit, because not only would he have frozen to death for sure covered in mud, when it talks about how cold Katniss has been every single night, like there's no way he would have been warm in there. Some geologist is going to comment and be like, actually, mud gets really warm, so he would have been kept nice and toasty. Well, I don't know that for sure, okay? I could call my geologist friend, but I'm not going to bother.
Actually, I asked him and he said it would be really cold.
How he also doesn't have trench foot after being in mud that long, I don't know, but it doesn't matter. He doesn't have trench foot and he didn't freeze to death and he's still alive and he's covered in mud. He's also super injured. Like his leg has like this massive gash on it and he's basically slowly bleeding out. So she drags him into the water to like clean him off, and then she finds them a cave to sit in. And we have a little cave. So they're in the cave. They're in the cave. It's over here.
My leg!
It's over here by the river. We're in a cave. But they find the cave and they have this whole reunion moment, and they're both like absolutely thrilled by the fact that they can both survive now together. They kiss. They meet, they find the cave, and they're like just kind of chatting, catching up about what's happened through the games, and they realize, you know, we can survive together, like this is so great. And then, you know, they have a little moment and they kiss. And then Katniss ventures outside the cave, I don't remember why, but there's a little pot of broth sitting there that was sent to them by Haymitch. And Katniss immediately thinks to herself, oh, Haymitch is sending me a message here. 1 kiss equals 1 pot of soup. Now, I get what she's trying to say here, which is that Haymitch is saying, amp up the romance and I'll keep sending you sponsor gifts, like this is your way to survive, basically. It's just worded so funny. It's so funny. Like, Katniss literally thinks to herself, like, oh, he's telling me that 1 kiss equals 1 pot of soup. I don't know why it made me laugh so hard, but it's just like, yeah, right, every time I kiss him, I just receive a little pot of soup from the sky, and that's a perfectly normal thing to have happen. So anyway, then we get a lot of time with them in the cave, and this is just establishing them as a little couple, right? And they have a lot of romantic moments together. It is a YA romance, after all. That is the genre. Well, I don't know that it's technically officially a romance, but let's be honest here. Nobody actually cares about the games themselves. It's all about Peeta versus Gale. They bond, and she tells him the story of how she got Prim's goat. And this is only really relevant because it makes her think about Gale. And so she again kind of has this like emotionally torn moment where she's having all this time with Peeta, but she misses Gale and she feels kind of bad and she doesn't know what he thinks of all of this. This time around, I have a little bit less patience for this. The first time, like I said, I think it makes sense that she's like, I'm so confused as to why Peeta would do this. I'm not getting comfort from him. So I miss Gale. I don't know what's going on. I miss home. Like, I think it makes sense that she thought of Gale the first time. Maybe I can justify it by saying, you know, like Peeta is kind of dying. He's clearly got blood poisoning. His leg wound is like really fucking him up. And she's like, oh my God, he's gonna die. And she doesn't know what to do to help him. And so maybe it kind of makes sense that she again is seeking that comfort and thinking about Gale. But I don't know. I feel like in this moment, it makes a lot less sense that she thinks about him because she's with Peeta. So can't she get that comfort from Peeta? And like with survival such in the forefront of her mind, like would she really be thinking about Gale's feelings in this moment? Personally, I don't think so. I could be wrong, though. Who knows? I've never been in a life or death situation. Maybe you do think about other people's feelings in that moment, but I just find it unlikely. But then there's another announcement over the loudspeaker, because you'll notice we haven't had any action for a while. We still have these people over here that are alive. We still have these people by the cornucopia, and we still have Katniss and Peeta, but none of them are fighting each other. And the game makers can't have that, obviously. They make an announcement saying, hey, y'all, go back to the cornucopia. Tomorrow morning, there's going to be stuff there. Every one of you needs something very badly. And so there's going to be a backpack there that has whatever you need in it. Katniss and Peeta... Now, Katniss and Peeta immediately know that whatever's in there is the medicine that's going to cure Peeta, right? He's got blood poisoning. He needs antibiotics. The antibiotics are going to be in their bag at the cornucopia. However, Peeta immediately is like, absolutely not. It's going to be way too dangerous. You're not going to...
They ask you how you are.
Sacrifice yourself for me. I won't allow it. And so he basically threatens to make a bunch of noise if she leaves so that the other tributes would like know where he is and they could come kill him. So basically saying like, well, if you want me to survive, then you can't go risk yourself for me. It's all kind of backwards, but it's supposed to be sweet. It's basically him saying, I don't want you to risk your life for me. I'd rather die than lose you. So don't do that. We'll have the wine represent the stuff everybody needs. Because don't we all need it? This is like, well, dang, I really want to go get the stuff and save Peeta, but Peeta is like, absolutely not, you're not allowed. And they just get into a big fight over it. And then Katniss ends up caving because she knows that Peeta is serious. Like, if she leaves, he'll make a bunch of noise, and then she'll come back to a dead Peeta anyway, so I risk it. And then she again ventures out of the cave to do a little bit of hunting and gather a little bit of water and, you know, just generally housekeeping stuff. While she's outside, she gets a package from a sponsor. And what does that package have in it, you might wonder? Not antibiotics. No, it has sleeping pills. Or like, not really pills, but like a liquid. Like a liquid that she can work into the food that's going to knock Peeta out and make him go to sleep. So obviously this is what she does. Oop, I moved the river. Obviously this is what she does, right? She knocks Peeta out. So he's sleeping. I don't know how to represent him sleeping. Let's have him sleep like this. Because he's not dead still. But he's sleeping. And she goes to the cornucopia. All of the backpacks are going to rise out at a certain time, but everybody does kind of come over into this area for them, right? So right as the platforms click into place, the girl from District 5, who again she refers to as Foxface through the entire book, which is just so rude, comes running out, grabs what she needs, and leaves. And Katniss is like, oh my god, that's so smart. Why didn't I think of that? This girl is so clever. This guy comes out from over here. He's been over in this corner the whole time. He's also massive. So he's from the same district that Rue is, but he's like this massive farm boy, right? And so basically nobody's been messing with him, and he's just kind of been over in this corner by himself surviving. So he wants to come for whatever it is he needs. Who knows what that is? They never say. And then obviously there's the girl and the boy from District 2 and the boy from District 10. And all of them are around in this area. I really don't remember what happened. I feel like the boy from District 10 is dead. But I don't know when he dies. Oh my god, I remember! He has been dead this whole time. This is the guy who, no, I'm wrong about that. Sorry if you can hear my Discord. I do apologize. I just feel like he's not alive right now. I am pretty sure that this guy is dead. But I don't remember when he dies. So we're just gonna, like, move him down here. Like, I won't throw him, but I'll just put him right here. And then if in my notes he comes back up, I'll bring him back. But I actually think he might have been dead this whole time. Because when would he have died? I don't know. Okay, he's probably dead. He wasn't that important. We need all these people now. So Katniss goes to get her bag from the cornucopia. And the girl from District 2, I think her name is Clove. It tackles her and easily overpowers her because, again, like, their size difference is a really big deal is made out of that. So the girl from District 2 has been training for this her whole life. She's super strong, and she tackles Katniss, and she's kind of just, like, holding her down. And she has this whole villain speech. She wants to, like, make it hurt. She's pretty sadistic, right? They're raised to be pretty sadistic. So she's got Katniss trapped, and she wants to, like, torture her, basically. But this ends up going badly for her because Thresh comes around. Thresh is the boy from District 11. Now, I'll remind you that that's the same district that Rue is from. The girl from District 2, while she's taunting Katniss, starts talking about... Is the boy from District 10 the one that killed Rue? No, that's the boy from 1. I got that confused already once. I don't remember. I'll put a voiceover in. I'll Google it when I'm done filming when he died.
He just kind of randomly got killed on day 2 by Cato, and I think he just is shown on the ceiling at the end of the day, and that's why I missed it.
So the girl from 2 says something about, oh, weren't you so sad when that little girl died, or whatever, the girl from District 11, and Thresh overhears this, and he's like, now what the heck did you just say? And the girl from District 2 is like, I didn't say anything. And then Thresh kills her, basically. And Thresh is like, no, I heard you. Did you kill her? And he's like, did you kill that little girl? And it becomes clear that, like, Thresh did not actually really know Rue, which makes sense. I think a lot of the tributes don't really know each other before they go in. I think it's actually kind of rare that Katniss and Peeta really knew each other. But anyway, so Thresh is like, did you kill that little girl? And Clove is like, ooh, no, I didn't. I don't know what you're talking about. And Thresh is like, meh, and kills her. So Clove is dead now. Cato's obviously upset about this, and so he charges up to fight Thresh, and Thresh is kind of standing over, oh, Cato's over here. He's holding like a rock or something. I don't remember what he kills Clove with, but he's holding whatever he killed Clove with, and he's standing over Katniss, and Katniss says to him, like, just make it quick, like, just don't make it painful. And Thresh is looking at her, and he just says, no. It's clear to Thresh that because Clove was, like, taunting Katniss over Rue, that Katniss and Rue had bonded and probably, you know, made an alliance. Like, he figures all this out in the moment. And he just tells her, this one time, I'll let you go. For the little girl. And now we're even. And again, I think this is so important because it again shows them almost like working together and not seeing each other as enemies. Like, obviously he's saying, if I ever run into you again, I will kill you because I'm trying to survive. But he's like, in this moment, I'm going to let you go because I owe you. I owe you because you looked after her. So he lets Katniss go and she runs off back to the cave with Peeta. And the last thing she sees is that they start fighting. And also the girl from District 5 is the only other person who's still alive. But anyway, Katniss gets back to the cave and she gives Peeta the medicine and then she passes out. She wakes up a little bit later and Peeta's like, oh my god, thank god you're alive. You came back with like the scariest head wound. And also I'm pissed at you for knocking me out, but also I'm really grateful for you saving my life. And he's like, I told you not to risk your life for me. And she's like, I can't live without you. And he's like, I can't live without you either. And he confesses his love for her. And in his love confession, he also says that he's kind of always loved her. Like, this isn't a new thing. Like, that he's watched her from afar, like, their whole childhood and has kind of always pined after her. And that's why he rescued her with the bread. And that's why, like, basically he's done all of this. Why he, like, needed no convincing, according to Haymitch, to, like, go for the, like, lover's plan and, like, all of that stuff. It's because he's always been in love with Katniss. And Katniss is like, oh my god, he's such a good actor. He's really putting on a show for these people, and what a smart play. And so she's like, I love you too, Peeta. And then they kiss. And then they get another pot of stew, because again, one kiss equals one pot of stew in this world. So that's still so funny to me. Then the, you know, anthem plays and they show the faces and we find out that Thresh is dead. So now it's just them, Cato, and Foxface. They have to find food. Now Peeta is like, his leg is better. It's not like perfect, but it's better. And they leave the cave and they're walking around. They kind of venture into this area. They're not like back to the lake, but they're kind of here. And Katniss is like, you know what? You're making so much noise with your stupid limp. And I can't, you're scaring away the animals. And Peeta is like, I'm useless anyway. Like, I'm useless at hunting, so why don't you go hunt us food and I'll gather us some berries and we can meet back here. And Katniss is like, okay. And she teaches him the same whistle that they use with Rue. And then Katniss goes off this way and keeps hunting. Now Peeta, he's gathering his berries here by the river, and Katniss is trying to find him again. And she's whistling and he's not responding. And she ends up like running over. She's super worried. She thinks something happened to him. She's traumatized from the Rue situation. Peeta appears back in the clearing with berries in his hand, and Katniss is pissed. She's like, what the hell? Why'd you disappear like that? And Peeta's like, what are you talking about? Like, I was just getting berries. I told you I was going to get berries. There were some down by the river. And Katniss is like, oh my god, you scared the hell out of me. I thought you were dead. Don't do that. And then they hear a cannon go off. And they look over. And the girl from District 5 is fucking dead. She's just dead, like, right over there. And they're like, oh my god, look at her, she's dead. And Peeta's like, oh my god, Cato's in the area, he must be. And Katniss is like, no, there's no way. Peeta's like, oh my god, Cato must be in the area, he must have killed her. And Katniss was like, no, you killed her. And Peeta was like, what are you talking about? I think I would remember if I killed her. And Katniss is like, the berries you're holding are poison. So basically, Peeta had been collecting these berries. He had a whole pile of berries. And then he had walked off. And the girl from District 5 had snuck in, stolen some of their food, run off, ate some of it, ate a poison berry, and died. So now she's dead. R.I.P. Foxface. So they go back to the cave for the night. They don't bone, by the way. I don't know if I've said that, but that never happens. This is a YA. Get your head out of the gutter. When they wake up in the morning, the river is gone. The water's gone. And they're like, oh, they must be driving us back to the lake because it's just us and Cato left, and so they want this big showdown now. They want the showdown between us and Cato. Let me move my wine. We're gonna need the space. Actually, let me take a sip of my wine, and then I'll move it. They come back this way, and here's Cato. And they're ready for the big old showdown. But they don't really get the chance to have a showdown because there's like all these wolves. These wolves just come running out of nowhere. Now, if the boy from District 10 was still alive at this point, he actually might have been the first victim of the wolves, now that I think about it. But I just feel like he wouldn't have survived that long. I'm sure I just missed his death. He's dead. He's for sure dead at this point. So there's all these wolves around. And so they all run up and basically like sit on top of the cornucopia like this to get away from the wolves. And when they're looking at the wolves, they realize that they have like the eyes and the approximate size of the tributes. So they're like wolf mutations that are supposed to be basically the souls, if you will, of all of the tributes put into these wolves. Now, I'm sure it's just an illusion, but that's like kind of the idea. That's the message they're trying to send. And at some point in all this struggle, Katniss and Peeta knock Cato off the cornucopia. And then they're just sitting on top of it like this. I'm sure I'm not going to be able to get them to balance. But you get the idea. They're on top of it. Just imagine them on top of the cornucopia, okay? And Cato's like basically in the cornucopia like this. And this part is so gruesome. Cato is getting eaten alive. But he's eaten alive for like hours and hours and hours, and they somehow don't kill him. Like, they're eating him so slowly that they're like, he's like not dying. In the book, it's way too long. Like, the actual section itself was so much to read. It was actually really making my stomach roll. And it supposedly takes hours. Like, basically the whole night, he's dying for like 12 hours from what I can tell. It's like the whole evening goes by. And at dawn, they're like, oh my God. They like, why won't they just kill him? This is ridiculous. And they're like, they're just dragging it out for the show, for the people, whatever, the gruesomeness. So then Katniss is like, I'll put him out of his misery. And Peeta kind of holds on to her, and she leans out over the rim of the cornucopia, and she shoots him with an arrow. And it's just, the whole thing's really, 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 really gross. And as much as you hate Cato by this point, I don't feel like he deserves that. And I actually partially think that's why she did it, because I think part of the messaging of stories like this, when we're talking about like just war and we're talking about like what justifies revolution and all of that, a really important thing to establish. So even the people that are the villains are like in some way also a victim of the society, because they've drunk the Kool-Aid. They've really bought into the idea that the society is like the right way for a society to be. And obviously that leads them to commit some horrific actions, and I'm not like defending them, but I'm more just saying that like, I think when you have conversations about revolution and societies like this and stuff, it's just really important to understand that like the individual is not the problem. So while Cato was super evil and while we hate him, like he in and of himself is not the problem. He is a product of the society. And so in a weird roundabout way, like he is still a victim of the society. You see what I'm saying? I hope I explained that well. Anyway, so Cato dies a really horrific, gruesome death. And I do think there's a point to it, even though I hated reading it every second. And then it's just Peeta and Katniss. And so they go away from Cato's body and he gets sucked up and they're like, cool, they're going to play the anthem. Oh my God, we survived. They're super happy, but then they're not playing the anthem. They're not ending the games. And Katniss and Peeta are like, what the hell? Well, who could have seen this coming? Another twist from the game makers. They're like, oh, you thought we were going to let you both live. You thought we were going to let you both live? Nope. Actually, only one of you can live. So decide which of you is going to survive. Who could have seen that coming? Truly nobody. Peeta is immediately like, oh my God, I'll die. And Katniss is like, no, I'll die. And they're arguing over who's going to die for the other. And it's very, very sweet. So it's very romantic. Like, they're both trying to die for each other. And Peeta kind of rips his bandages off, so he's like bleeding out. And Katniss is trying to get his band-aids back on. And she's crying and he's crying. And then Peeta's like, just kill me. And Katniss is like, no, wait. And something that I believe Haymitch said before the game started comes back to Katniss, where he said, they have to have a winner. And she says to him, why don't we both die? And so she hands him the poison berries that she still has in her pocket. For some reason, she held on to them. Not sure why. But she has the poison berries in her pocket. So she hands him some. And it's like, okay, we'll both eat these at the same time. And then we'll both die at the same time. And then there won't be a winner. There won't be a winner of the games. And then at the very least, they don't win. So they both agree to this plan. And they stand back to back with their feet in the lake. And they stand with the berries out like this. And they count down 3, 2, 1. And they both put the berries in their mouth. And it's right when they put the berries in their mouth that the games are like, all right, fine. Fine, you both win. Fine, you both win. And so they spit the berries out, and they're like, yay, oh my God, we survived. And they get sucked up into the hovercraft, and Peeta's immediately taken for medical attention because he was, like, bleeding a bunch. And Katniss is, like, pounding on the door, like, Peeta! Peeta, no! And that's the end of the 74th Hunger Games, the actual games. I'm just gonna go over what happens at the very end of the book because there's not enough left for it to justify me setting up a whole other set and getting ready again and filming a different time. Like I said, Peeta gets taken for medical attention, and Katniss also actually gets taken for medical attention because she obviously still needs it, even if she's not in as bad of shape as Peeta. And for a few days, she's just, like, healing. She's kind of locked in this room, and they'll only let her eat certain things, and they're, like, doing all these surgeries on her and whatever. And by the end of it, she's, like, basically not just back to normal, but almost, like, more perfect than she was before. Her skin looks perfect, her hair looks perfect, all this stuff, and she feels perfectly healthy. But she hasn't seen Peeta, and she wants to see Peeta. She sees Haymitch and Cinna, and she's like, where's Peeta? I want to see Peeta. And they're like, no, they want the first time you two see each other to be in your, like, post-games interview. They want the moment you two embrace on camera. And then Haymitch has a sit-down talk with Katniss where he's like, do you understand how much danger you're in? He's like, you really fucked over the Capitol. They're super upset about the fact that both you and Peeta are alive. And you have to sell the story that you are just so madly in love with him. That was what drove it, and not because you were trying to rebel. If they even think for a second that you were trying to rebel against them, they will kill you, they will kill your entire family, they will kill everybody that ever loved you, and everyone that you ever loved. So you need to sell the story that you are in love with him. And she's like, you told him this too, right? And Haymitch was like, I didn't need to. And Katniss was like, what does that mean? They get into the interview, and they run up and they embrace, and canonically, in the book, written in there, it says they kiss on stage for 10 minutes. 10 minutes? That is so much time. But I swear, it says in the book, they run up, they embrace each other, they hug, they kiss, and then it's like, and this went on for about 10 minutes before the interviewer was like, okay guys, sit down for your interview. I understand that you two just went through a lot together. Like, I understand we trauma bonded a lot here, and I understand you're happy to see each other, but 10 minutes? And they're, like, on a stage in front of a crowd, and there's, like, an interviewer standing there. That's an insane amount of time. It really is. But they make out for 10 minutes on stage, and then they sit together and they cuddle, and this is where Katniss finds out that Peeta here lost his leg. He's not going to stand up now. That was a bad idea. I'll lean him up against her there. It's very symbolic. Peeta doesn't have his own actual leg anymore. They gave him a prosthetic. But like I said, the amount of tech that they have in Pan Am is really, like, hit or miss. Like, the Capitol has access to a lot of stuff, so even though, like, a lot of the places that people live and a lot of the lives they're living are very primitive and they don't have a lot of technology, the Capitol has a ton. So Peeta gets some super fancy robotic leg that's basically like him having a leg, but it's not his real leg. They did have to amputate his leg. They couldn't save it. She finds this out, like, in front of everybody, and she's upset, and she apologizes to him. She says it's her fault because she was the one who put the tourniquet on it when she was, like, bandaging him up, and he's like, yeah, sorry you saved my life, like, geez, and they have a whole moment. So they're really, really selling the love thing, is what I'm saying. They get on the train back to District 12, and while they're about to get on the train, they kind of take a walk together, just the two of them, and something Katniss says, like, kind of makes Peeta think. He's like, wait, what did you just say? The miscommunication becomes clear. And Peeta realizes that Katniss was faking it this whole time. So he really thought they were falling in love. And she thought that he was faking everything for the games. And that's what she, in her head, thought she was doing too. She's confused by his reaction. She did not realize he actually had feelings for her. So she's like, I don't get why he's so upset. But then it, like, all kind of clicks for her and she feels really bad. And she says to him, you know, I'm trying to figure out how I feel because everything was in the game. Like, is that how I'm going to feel outside of the games? I don't know. I can't really fault her. Like, they very much trauma bonded, obviously. They just went through a lot together. And I don't think she should feel like she's trapped in a relationship with him just because that's what she had to do in the games to survive, right? I support her. I support her figuring out how she really feels. But, of course, Peeta's not thrilled about this, but he takes it really well, like a king. He's basically just like, okay, well, let me know when you figure it out, and he walks away all dejected, and he's pretty sad. And that's the end of the first Hunger Games book. I have a lot of wrap-up thoughts, and I also want to do some research into some other things that I want to talk about. So this is not going to be the final clip of the video, I'm sure. But it's going to be the bulk of the video, and I really hope the footage looks good because I do not want to have to do this again. That was about 2 hours of filming. Like and subscribe, people. This was a lot of work, okay? Alright, I'm back sitting in this very spot. Let's let's do a little bit of analysis. Now, I want to describe what I mean by literary analysis because I think it means slightly different things to different people. We're going to deep dive into the book, the characters, the plot, all of that stuff. But I'm going to do it through the lens of essentially trying to figure out what Suzanne Collins was trying to do, and then whether or not I think she was successful in doing that. My personal opinions about the book and whether or not I enjoyed it will come at the end. I'm also splitting this into two different sections. We're going to talk about the book itself, and then I'm going to kind of step out and talk about the effect it had on pop culture as well. One of the things I noticed coming into this book as an adult is that there is a lot of symbolism in here that I just completely missed when I was a kid reading it. This is something I'm going to come back to many times as we're going through this analysis, but it's really, really important to remember that The Hunger Games is a young adult novel. It was written and intended for children. There is nothing that bothers me more than people who don't like or don't understand a genre, and then they read a book in that genre, and then they say that the book is bad. The book is not necessarily bad. It could be bad, it could not be bad. But you wouldn't really be a good judge of that, would you? I'm not going to judge The Hunger Games like it is an adult work of fiction. I'm going to judge it like it's a young adult novel, because that's what it is. And when I was a young adult reading this book, I definitely picked up on the themes, but I wasn't really in a headspace, both in reading books and in general, where I would be like thinking about theme. So one of the things that I find really interesting, kind of going back to this as an adult, is thinking about what my impressions of the book were, because that to me is the theme. What I walked away from the book thinking about it is what I took away as the theme, even if I didn't think of it that way. And I very much think of The Hunger Games as a book about rebellion. I think of it as a dystopian novel where they rebel against the government. So I do think it's successful in that way, at least in my own personal experience. Because as a kid, without really equipped with the skills or the knowledge, if you will, to understand what Suzanne Collins' intention was and really interpret the theme, if you will, I still got it. I still knew what the theme was. And now, not just rereading it, but also reading what Suzanne Collins has said her intention with it was, like understanding that its purpose was to explore that idea of a just war in a way that kids can understand. I, a child who read it, understood it in that way. So I think it gets an A+ for that. On the reread, I did pick up on a lot of symbolism that I missed before. There was a lot of stuff sprinkled in there. I just feel like I did have a deeper understanding of it. And this leads me to one of the things that I think is part of why these YA books were so successful. Yes, they were written for children, but they were not just written with children in mind. What do I mean by that? I feel like a lot of YA novels fall into a trap of thinking their reader is stupid. So a lot of the theme, a lot of the purpose, a lot of the point of the book is almost spoon-fed, like it has to be explained to the reader by the protagonist. This makes YA novels sometimes very hard for adults to read because it's so obvious the message you're supposed to be taking away and everything is just, it's told, it's not shown. But not only that, it doesn't just affect the adults. Kids are not stupid, especially teenagers. They understand a lot more than a lot of adults give them credit for. Even if they're in middle school, they don't need you to spoon feed them the point of the novel for them to walk away with it. In fact, I feel like it almost makes a novel less effective for a child if it's trying to shove a message down the throat saying like, this is the intention, this is what I want you to take away. I do think that's something that these really popular YA books did really well. I think they were books that adults could enjoy as well. So then you buy the book for your kid reads it, and then you pick it up too because they love it, and then you love it too. And that's how it ends up being as famous as it is. The spoon feeding the message is one of those. The other big piece of it is something that I think of as the incompetent adult character. It's no secret that kids think adults don't know anything. An important piece of a YA novel usually involves a child going on some kind of adventure. These are adventures that adults would stop them from going on in the real world, usually. Would Bella's dad have let her date a vampire if he had known that Edward was one? Probably not. So what a lot of YA novels end up doing is making all of the adults in the book completely incompetent. They don't take care of the kids, they don't care about them at all, they don't even really pay attention to them, and it opens up those children to then go on the adventures that they end up having. If we look at a lot of the popular YA book series of the time, you'll find that they don't really feature adults like that. These authors were a little bit more creative in coming up with how these children have these adventures without making the adults really, really stupid. I think that does make it more digestible as an adult, because then you're not reading it like, this wouldn't happen in real life, or are you kidding me? Or like, what are these parents doing? I feel like the adults in the Hunger Games are like that. Competent, I mean. You don't really ever come across a character that you're like, ugh, this person wouldn't exist in real life, or oh, no adult would actually treat a child like that, or whatever. It's the reality of the society. These kids are sent to their death, and there's not really anything the adults around them can do about it, and so they do their best to support them, but the kids are kind of bound for this adventure anyway. Adventure, fight to the death, same difference.
Completely forgot about Katniss's mom when I was filming this. Obviously, Katniss's mom is neglectful of her, but that's not really what I meant. Sometimes in young adult novels, I find, and this is just my opinion, that the adults can feel like caricatures of adults as opposed to how a real adult would behave. So even that neglectfulness that can happen in real life feels unrealistic because the character is like almost a caricature. And you could make the argument that that is how children view adults. Like, adults almost are caricatures of actual adults to children. But my point is simply that that then makes it very difficult for adults to read the book because they have nothing to relate to, and they're just sitting there the whole time like, ugh, this person is so fake. They would never exist in real life. So Katniss's mom is neglectful, but she's neglectful in a way that makes sense with her character, and that is possible to exist in real life. So anyway, I just wanted to pop in and say that.
But just in my quest to figure out why these books ended up being so popular, I think that's definitely a key piece of it, is that they were enjoyable for adults as well. And I, rereading it as an adult, did enjoy it. So my setup's a little precarious here, and I keep bumping the cords and stuff. You can even see a cord, I know, I'm sorry. So if the camera ends up like tilting a little bit as we go, or if it's like moving around, that's why, because I probably bumped it and had to readjust it. It's not the most stable, but you know. Another thing that I think the Hunger Games did really well is that Katniss actually does feel 16. Like I said, I feel like a lot of YA authors kind of fall into this trap of thinking of children as stupid. And it's just a really weird mindset to go into writing a YA novel with. Like, I want to write a book for kids, but I don't think they can understand anything. So I have to just spell everything out for them. And so as a result, the kids in the books, the actual characters, end up falling flat a little bit. They don't feel real. You have to respect the reader. And I feel like a lot of YA authors don't. And it really shows in their characters and the way they write the kids. I cannot tell you the number of YA novels I have read where the main character didn't feel like a child. They felt like an adult trying to write a child. They felt like they had the perspective that an adult thinks a child has, not that a child actually has. They feel filtered, and as a result, they don't feel real. Katniss is clearly a 16-year-old girl. I feel like this is something Suzanne Collins does really, really well. There were many points during reading this where I really felt Katniss's youth in her character, in her actions, in her thought processes. The way she interprets the world around her, the way she interacts with others, the way that she approaches the games, all of that I do feel has a very youthful energy to it. The prime example being something I've already kind of talked about, which is her relationship with Gale and Peeta. Her approach to both of them is very youthful in nature, in my opinion. She doesn't realize that Gale's proposition is romantic in the beginning. She doesn't really think of him as a romantic prospect through the whole book, even though she misses him a ton. And she doesn't really understand that Peeta is not faking it. She thinks he's doing it all for the games too. She's very dense, I guess, is what it is. And boy, does 16-year-old Mare relate to that. When I was 16, I felt like boys were like a puzzle. I had no idea how to figure them out. Now I know it's because I was thinking a little too hard. Men don't think that hard. That's the number one key. What you see is what you get. But Katniss made that mistake too. They're showing her what they've got, and she's like, I don't know what this means. Ladies, don't think about it too hard. He probably means what he's telling you. There's some life advice for you. Anyway. But yeah, that's just one example of it, but I feel like there were many points in the book where it was really clear that Katniss is a 16-year-old child, and her thought process and the way she approaches problems is how a 16-year-old would approach those problems. That does two things. That makes her very relatable for the teens reading her. It also makes her very effective as a driver in making you hate the Capitol when you're reading it as an adult. Again, I touched on this a little bit already, so I won't go super in depth, but understanding Katniss's youth and seeing it so clearly really puts into perspective the fact that these are children that they are sending into the lion's den. Rue was 12 years old. 12? Imagine fighting to the death at 12. And I just think Suzanne Collins does a really good job of actually representing the youth and the characters. So when you read it as an adult, you're like, holy crap. These are kids. I don't want to fight someone to the death, let alone send a child into that situation. So I thought it was effective in that way too. And with that, we can probably deep dive a little bit more into the characters. Starting with Katniss, obviously, our main gal. Like I said, she feels like a very realistic 16-year-old. I do think a lot of her actions are really well thought out. It's all based in the character. There weren't really any moments through the book where I was like, Katniss wouldn't do that. I felt like I knew her and I felt like she was real. She also goes on quite the character arc. Where in the beginning of the book, she's super anti-capital. I mean, she's anti-capital the whole book. But in the beginning, she doesn't really want to participate in the game aspect of the games because she hates the capital. Once she's in the game, she's in full survival mode. She's willing to play the game if that means she gets to live. Making the shift into the mindset of a victor and understanding that she's actually capable of winning the games and then going out and doing that with Peeta by her side. So I feel like she had not one, but two big emotional shifts in the book. The first being the beginning of the games or Peeta's love confession, which are within a few chapters of each other. And when Rue dies. So not only does she have character growth, but it's based in the plot and it has impact on where the plot goes. All just generally good writing. However, that was really intense, I'm sorry. In my opinion, and this is just my opinion, Katniss is the only character with real character growth. Everybody else in the book, in my opinion, does not really grow. They're all kind of static. Don't kill me. Let me explain. What is a static character, Meredith? Well, let me tell you. A static character is just quite simply a character that does not change throughout the novel. They don't grow, they don't learn anything, they don't get worse, they don't get better. They are the same person at the end of the book that they are at the beginning. Now, that's not to say that we don't notice a change in some way. And it's not necessarily a bad thing either. Focusing in on... I almost called them Pale. I almost combined them into one person. Peeta and Gale. Pale. We're going to focus in on Peeta and Gale and Haymitch. It's not the characters themselves that change, it's Katniss's perception of them. When we meet Haymitch, she views him as a drunk and kind of useless. They prove their worth to him, and he's like, okay, fine, I'll help you win the games. And other than that, his mindset doesn't really shift the whole time. He then is just full in on helping them win the games. And he doesn't really learn, he doesn't really grow, and he doesn't really change. However, Katniss's opinion of him changes the further you get into the book. She realizes how resourceful, smart, and helpful he is, even going so far as having a moment with Peeta in the actual games when they're talking about how Haymitch must have survived because he was so smart. He's not stronger, he's not faster, he's not better at survival skills, but he outsmarted everybody else in the games, and that was how he ended up living. She also, after experiencing the games herself, thinks about how hard it must be on Haymitch to be the sponsor every year. He's got to send these kids to their death. So of course he's kind of distant, and of course he's an alcoholic, because if he gets attached to them, then he's just setting himself up to be heartbroken when they die. He views being sent to the Hunger Games from District 12 as a death sentence because it pretty much is. He's the sole living survivor. He's the only person still alive from District 12 who won the Hunger Games. Every time he's been a sponsor since, the kids have died. This makes Katniss feel for him, and she understands why he's an alcoholic and why he was so distant. But that's not to say that Haymitch isn't an alcoholic at the end of the book. He's not as distant, but again, that change happened really early in. He didn't care about them, then he cared about them, then he didn't change at all. Same with Peeta. Hear me out. I am aware of the fact that when you get to the second book, you see a lot of change in Peeta, so I want to hold out a little bit on this. I'm not going to go too in depth. But in the beginning of the book, Katniss views Peeta as a mysterious boy who gifted her bread for some reason when she needed it most, and that's it. And through the book, Katniss gets to know Peeta. So it seems like he changes, but he doesn't really. You can't really point to a moment in the book at all where Peeta changes. He's stable. He's pretty consistent through the whole thing. He's static. That's what I'm saying. Gale's not really a fair character to rope into this because we just don't really see him. Gale doesn't exist. So we'll just put him aside for this conversation. However, I say all of that not necessarily as a bad thing. Again, Katniss feels like a very realistic 16-year-old. When I was 16, I only cared about myself. Katniss understands everybody around her in relation to her. And if you want to get real deep with it, we all do. However, as you grow older, you grow a little bit more of an ability to understand the world around you, separate from yourself, right? Not just how things affect you, but how they affect others and how everybody moves through the world. Or you would hope they would, but main character syndrome is kind of rampant. But that's exactly it. Katniss has main character syndrome. She's the main character, so she's pretty focused on herself, and she only really ever understands people in how they relate to her. Maybe these characters don't change, or maybe she just doesn't notice the change. But instead, what makes them interesting and what makes them have growth is that we find out more about them through the book, through Katniss's eyes. As she gets to know them, we get to know them, and that's the growth that we perceive. But it's not really character growth. So I don't know, I'm looking forward to the second book, seeing how and if there is any character growth with Peeta and Haymitch specifically. Like I said, I know that Peeta seems different after the games, but if he's just consistently different after the games, I feel like I'll be pretty disappointed. I want to see him work through some trauma. That might be a lot to ask of a YA. I did say at the beginning that I understand this as a YA, so maybe I have too high of expectations. But from what I can tell, a lot of people feel like Catching Fire is the best book of the three of them. So maybe I will be pleasantly... I guess I'm not surprised isn't the right word because I'm expecting it. Pleasantly proven correct. There we go. All right, let's talk about the plot. I don't know why I said that like that. The plot. I think it's good. I thought it was fun. I'm kidding. I'm going to say more than that. Don't worry. I think I've proven that at this point. I actually genuinely have very little to say about the plot. Mostly just because I find plot usually to be the least interesting aspect of a book. I like characters, I like growth, I find people interesting, I like dialogue, I like conversation, and plot needs to be there. You can't not have plot. But I think from like a analysis perspective, the plot really matters for two reasons maybe. To force the character growth and to fill the space. Now, you might be thinking I'm crazy right about now, about to click off the video, like why am I gonna take literary analysis from a girl who doesn't like the plot of books? That's not what I mean. I do like the plot. My point is just that the plot is almost never interesting enough for me to discuss afterwards. And if you think that's not the case for you too, think about your favorite book, think about your favorite movie, and think about what you really love about it. Is it the plot? No, you love the characters. You're attached to the characters. You love them. You feel for them. They're your kids, your best friend, your significant other. You've got your book boyfriend. You've got your book best friend. You've got your book pet, for God's sake. Yeah, a great plot twist can be really effective, but it's all moot if the characters are not great. So really all I do have to say about the plot is that I thought it was interesting. I thought it was an interesting concept, obviously. I think it's well done, and I think that the way that the plot and the characters weave together is really just expertly executed. And I was hooked the whole time. I wanted to know what happened next, even though I already did. But I had to care about the characters to care about all that. And I don't know. I don't find analyzing plot interesting. I'm sorry. That's just not me.
Turns out it is me. I have more to say. I do apologize for the strong drop-off in both video and audio quality. I did have more to say, and it was a little too much to add in a voice over, but not quite enough for me to think it was worth it to set up my whole setup again and set up my nice mic. I'm editing right now, and I have a few things I wanted to add, and so I thought I'd add them into this section because I didn't say much about the plot, and they are both kind of plot related, but also kind of theme related. And both of them actually relate to the idea of the Hunger Games as entertainment. So it's a huge part of the book that the capital and the rich districts within Panem all consider the Hunger Games to be entertainment. They actually enjoy watching the games. It's more like a sporting event to them. They bet on it. They sponsor people, yada yada. They have commentators that comment over the whole thing. And while I was editing, I kept hearing myself talk about this. And I just kept thinking about all the major world events that are happening right now. And all the major world events that generally happen and pop up. And how there's an aspect of entertainment to journalism that gets talked about, but in my opinion, not enough. So again, many people within Panem consider the Hunger Games to be entertainment, but the people who don't and don't want to support it are still forced to watch it. The Capitol makes everybody watch the Hunger Games, somehow. kids get off school, yada yada. This is all told to us by Katniss. I didn't mention it before because I didn't think it was relevant, but it's relevant now, right? So everybody's forced to watch the Hunger Games, but the people who don't really want to watch it, she comments at one point that there's this element of like, but you're also not able to look away. And I think that's human nature when it comes to disaster and tragedy. Like, there's a part of you that feels like you need to witness it, like you need to be aware of what is happening to other people in the world. And journalists often capitalize off of that. It's well known that it is very good for the news industry for bad things to happen globally. It's disgusting, it's gross, and I could honestly make an entire video essay about my issues with the journalism industry. I just think it's gone so downhill and it's only going more downhill. But the edit of this video is over 2 hours and I'm not quite through the footage, so I will save that for another day. But what I'll say now is there is definitely an element of entertainment in the way that a lot of journalists approach how they write about tragedy and thinking about clicks and getting people onto your website, sometimes more so than delivering accurate information about whatever's going on. I would love to say that we the people are not culpable in this, but if we did not click, they would not post these things. It is insane and hilarious that I'm doing a voiceover to my already webcam edit into what I was already editing, but I wanted to add that I did not mean to imply that we should not be looking at the news. I said just then, like, if we didn't click, they wouldn't do it. I did not mean that means we should not look at the news. I just more mean, like, you know, the really clickbaity news. And if people did not fall for that, then they would not do it. And so I do think there's a culpability on both sides. Like, the news organization should not do it, and there should be laws around it. But I also do think that people need to be more informed and more able to, like, recognize when they're being sold snake oil, and that media literacy is at, like, an all-time low. That was what I meant by that. Please read the news. Please be informed on what's going on. That's super important. So there's an element of culpability that we have in being sucked into the showcase of it all that we maybe need to acknowledge in order to fix it. I don't know if that was intentional commentary, especially because this book came out a while ago, but human nature is as human nature does, and I'm sure that journalists were just as corrupt back then as they are now. And, like, to add on to that, there is the entire industry of true crime. True crime, whether it's a podcast, a documentary, anything like that. Whether or not you like it, it is objectively capitalizing off of tragedy. What do you want me to say? That's what it is. It's making entertainment out of something horrible that happened to somebody. I am not really a consumer of the true crime genre, obviously. Most specifically the podcasts. I've seen a lot of the documentaries, but I've heard that they're not done super well, and so I've kind of drifted away from them because a lot of the people who actually have some relation to those cases have come out and said the Netflix documentaries and all that aren't always super accurate. I don't know that for sure for myself. That's an allegation. I don't want to get sued. But I've just heard people say it's not always a super accurate representation. But I've never been a huge proponent of true crime podcasts, and so I have no idea if they're accurate or not, or if there are any of them that do it well. But even if you are a fan of it, you have to admit that there is an element of you that can acknowledge that it is capitalization off of tragedy. That is what it is. And I call true crime out because it's an obvious example of this, but this pops up in other places. If people can make money off it, they're going to try and make money off of it. And tragedy does draw eyes to it. That was kind of my point about the world event thing. Ugh, I need a sip of my wine. I don't really have much to say on that besides to point it out. Again, I have no idea if this was intentional on Suzanne Collins' part, but it was something that I noticed upon editing. And when I'm trying to figure out why these books are so successful, I do think that there is, especially with dystopian novels, like if you can accurately describe the society that we're currently living in or represent it in some way, then you will be more successful than a book that can't. The second point I wanted to make is specifically about the reader. Now, this is a point that a lot of people might not find very interesting, but as someone who is trying to be an author, no, sorry. Everybody always says you should just say it. I am an author. I'm working on a book, right? I find this very fascinating. Again, to reiterate, to just really beat the point into the ground, there are people within this society of Panem who consider the Hunger Games to be entertainment. I might be thinking too hard about this. I might have had a little bit too much wine tonight, but something that's just been stuck in my brain since I started editing this analysis section, are we not, like the reader, also doing the same thing. Not that I'm saying that it's problematic to read The Hunger Games, because obviously that's not true. But in a roundabout way, we are also being entertained by these games, are we not? Yes, there's commentary there, but there's entertainment as well. And you can read it from an angle of like, oh, this is so horrible, but I'm still being entertained, you know? Insert that movie clip where he's like, are you not entertained? I don't really have much more to add on that. I wish I had more intelligent thoughts about it. Maybe they'll develop as I read more of the books. But it's stuck in my brain and I had to mention it. Like, it's so interesting, the idea that the reader themselves are like part of this like entertainment network. I don't know. I just find it interesting. And I might explore it more as we go. And with that, I will pass it back to Meredith, who has a much nicer camera and a much nicer microphone to carry you through the rest of my analysis.
Then there's the world building. Now, one of the things I actually found really interesting upon the reread of this is how little world building there actually is in this novel. Again, you might be thinking I'm insane. Girl, didn't we learn about all the districts, and didn't we like learn about how the whole government system works, and didn't we see how... No, we didn't. Think about it. No, we didn't. We learned, in theory, overarchingly, what each district was. We learned that they like fish in District 4, and that District 11 is all about agriculture. But the only district we got a deep dive into besides District 12 was District 11 when Katniss was talking to Rue. Otherwise, we know almost nothing about any of the other districts. We also know almost nothing about the actual relationship between the government and the people of each society. We know that the peacekeepers exist. We also know that they can be corrupt. We know there was an attempted coup. We know it didn't work. We know the Hunger Games are punishment for that. We also know a few other key things. We know that the capital has significantly more technology than the people. We know that the capital has almost futuristic technology compared to what we have in our real world, if you will. We know they can mutate animals. We know they can design really cool tech. We also know that most of the people of Panem don't have access to this stuff. And we don't really know anything else. But again, I'm not saying that like it's a bad thing. I knew exactly what I needed to know to get through the book, and nothing more, and nothing less. And I actually think that's really, really good. I think more authors could learn from that. I am sure that we will learn significantly more about the world when we get into the other two books. I am positive of that, because I know more about the world from when I read them when I was a kid. But all Suzanne Collins gave us through this whole first book is exactly what we needed. There is nothing worse than a huge info dump at the beginning of the book that you're supposed to somehow remember. I don't know what all these creature names are. I'm not going to remember them past a few pages if they're not relevant. So if you describe a whole bunch of new creatures in this world, and then you drop those creatures and you don't bring one up again until book 3, what was the point? And exposition can be very boring. It can be very hard to get through. It has to be really weaved into the plot, especially for a YA. YA dives right into the plot. It moves really, really fast. You've got to hold those kids' attention. They've got TikTok. They didn't have TikTok when this book was written, but that doesn't mean they had good attention spans, okay? If you want to hold the kids' attention, you got to get to the action right away. You got to weave that exposition in there, and you got to only give what they need in the moment to understand what's happening right then. We learned that the capital could mutate animals when we learned what a Mockingjay was, and that did come back up later. But we didn't learn about the Tracker Jackers until they actually came about in the arena. And we're not going to learn about the other districts until they become relevant, and they just weren't in this first book. So even though we didn't get a ton of the world building, I actually really like that choice. I think it was a good choice, and like I said, I think more authors could take note. Stop info dumping. It doesn't work. Assume the reader will forget everything you tell them. Plant the seeds for things anyway, because people like being like, oh yeah. And lastly... Guys, I don't know, I'm in a weird mood today. The theme. The theme. Why am I talking about theme so much? Isn't the theme just something that your English teacher made up? When I was young and in English classes, I very much thought talking about the theme was stupid. And it wasn't until I was an adult reading and, writing my own book that I really grew to appreciate the overarching message. Now I am very much of the mindset that the best art comes when the author has something to say. And it's very hard to have something to say without having a theme, because those are kind of one and the same. I feel like one of the number one best things about this book is how clear the theme is without hitting you over the head with it. The whole point is sometimes rebellion is justified. That's from Suzanne Collins' own mouth. What does it take to justify war? Yet anyone who reads it is like, yeah, these people should rebel against the Capitol. Of course. That's what she was trying to do. She was trying to get the reader to understand that a rebellion of the people against the Capitol is a justified action. And like I said, as a kid, I understood that. As an adult, I understood that. But it's also not like in the middle of the book, Katniss was just like, oh, the Capitol sucks and we should rebel against them. Like, she doesn't have that, like, explicit thought. I think it's really well executed. I also think there's, like, layers that you can understand that, too. When I read it as a kid, I just was like, dang, this Capitol sucks. But when I read it as an adult, as someone with a full-time 9-to-5 job and bills to pay and all that, some of the aspects of living in this society hit a lot harder. And you're like, damn, that would really suck. And there are layers to that, right? Like, there are layers to how deep you can understand this book given your own reading comprehension levels going into it. Which, again, is, I think, a large part of the reason why, even though it's a YA, it became very popular. Okay. That's all for the book analysis. As for my personal opinion on it, I think I've made it clear at this point that I think it's really well done. I think it knows exactly what it is. Which, believe it or not, a lot of books don't. Suzanne Collins really said, this is a young adult novel, but it's going to be enjoyable for adults to read as well. And we're going to talk about rebellion and just war. And we're going to do it by having these kids fight to the death. And it was exactly that. It delivered on every promise. It gave you all the information you needed to understand every piece of the plot. There never felt like there was anything extraneous. You really cared about all the characters, even though they were static. That doesn't mean that they're poorly written, and that doesn't mean that they don't feel like real people. And again, I think it makes sense that Katniss's interpretation of these characters is all kind of done through her lens. And since we're reading through her perspective, we understand the characters as she understands the characters. And she's very young, so she's very focused on the self. Like, all of this really, it makes sense. It's just really well thought out and really well executed. And that's made apparent by how popular it became. Books don't reach this height without having some kind of merit to them. So yeah, I thought it was really good, and I'm genuinely excited to keep reading. I'm actually kind of bummed that I had to, like, film, you know, and like edit and all that stuff, and that I'm going to do all that before picking up the second book. I wanted to as soon as I put down the first one. And the last thing we're going to talk about is the effect on the world. Now, if you were not alive and or sentient at the time that this book came out, you could not possibly wrap your brain around the phenomenon it was. This is not just me trying to be like, oh, the books these days don't. No, you don't understand. Hunger Games was everywhere. You could not get away from it. And maybe it was just because I was in high school at the time, but it just feels like there's nothing coming out these days that has that kind of hype behind it. You could reference the Hunger Games to anyone at the time, and they would know what you were talking about. And I don't just mean you could say the Hunger Games and people would know what you were talking about. Like, you could reference something happening in the book and people knew about it, whether or not they'd read it, because it was so huge. People would do this thing to each other all the time. They'd whistle to each other in the halls. There were songs in the movie that people sang. It's not just the height it reached to, but how long it was popular for. The Hunger Games has like a multi-year span in which it just had pulp culture by the throat. And the movies were coming out, and everybody was excited for it. So even though there is stuff that gets really popular these days, I feel like the hype never lasts as long. Like, multiple years being that excited about one piece of media, I don't know, maybe I'm just getting older. Maybe I really am just getting older. But I just feel like nothing coming out right now, certainly no books, are reaching that kind of height. It was widely critically acclaimed as well and got a ton of praise. Both Stephen King and John Green praised it in reviews. It gained some criticism, some of which I think is fair and others I don't. One of the main criticisms of it is that it's a tired idea, right? The whole idea of having like some kind of death competition. I don't think this is really fair, I'll be honest. If you boil down literally any book, pick a random book off your shelf. If you broke it down into its base parts, it's not original. This is not an original take, but nothing's original anymore. But that doesn't mean art isn't worth creating, and that doesn't mean that there's not something original about it. But to say that because it's based off of a death game and a death game has been done and so there's no point in doing it again is like saying, well, someone's already written a romance, so why would you write a book that's just focused on two people in love? There's so many ways you can do that. There's so many interesting ways you can do that. People are so different. There are so many different ways to have a game that surrounds death where there can only be one survivor. Squid Games. Squid Games is an example of something that's come out since the Hunger Games that's also based off of the idea of playing games and death and all that. It's very, very different from the Hunger Games. So again, is any romance novel on my shelf not original because it's just a love story between two people? No, of course not. So I don't think it's fair to say the Hunger Games isn't original because it's a death game and that's been done. The other main criticism that I saw was that the love triangle is kind of lacking. Specifically that it's lacking the erotic energy of Twilight. That's according to Entertainment Weekly. It is kind of funny to use the word erotic to describe anything that happens in a YA, I will say. But there's a tension in Twilight between Bella and Edward, and between Bella and Jacob, that doesn't really exist, at least in the first Hunger Games novel. But Katniss doesn't even, like, know that these guys like her. How is there supposed to be tension between them? This bitch is trying to survive. I don't know. I get it and I don't. Part of what they were saying is that, like, Gale and Peeta kind of feel like the same person. And at least as of right now, we just don't know Gale well enough to even really care about him. We saw him for a second in the beginning, and then we spent the whole book with Peeta. So at this point, anyone who's read it is probably Team Peeta. What's going to happen in the second book? I don't know. We'll see. So I don't know if that criticism was just of the first book or if it was of the trilogy in general and how I'm going to feel at the end. But I was trying to look for stuff specific to the first Hunger Games book. So I can kind of see what they're saying, but again, I don't know that it's 100% fair because it definitely feels like something they're sowing the seeds to explore later. I would more put it, at least in the first book, like I don't care about Gale at all. I wish we were given a little bit more with Gale because then I'm actually torn. At least where I sit right now, I'm like, no, it's Peeta all the way. If she'd given me a little bit more at the beginning with Gale, I feel like I could get there. Like, I feel like I could be in a place where I like her so much with Gale at the beginning that I'm then torn seeing her with Peeta. Gale was pretty much out of sight, out of mind. And every time Katniss thought about him, I was like, why are you thinking about him right now? You've got a man right in front of you. I don't know if it would have been better or not to have had Gale and Katniss actually in a relationship before she goes off to the games. Because then there is that piece of like, oh, he's already her boyfriend. And so now she's like lovey-dovey with this other guy. And I could see that adding that tension that maybe is lacking a little bit in this first book. But I definitely feel like the tension is there between her and Peeta. Or at least I wanted them to kiss. That's maybe a weird thing to say about children in a book. And now just for some stats to back up what I've been saying about how popular it was. The initial print was about 200,000 when it first came out in 2008, and that had been bumped up to 800,000 by 2010 when the final book had come out. These are all numbers for just the first Hunger Games, by the way. The books also came out 3 years in a row, so 2008 was when the first one came out, 2009 was when the second one came out, 2010 was when the third one came out. By the time the first movie came out, in 2012, this book had sold 17.5 million copies worldwide. 17.5 million copies of one book. For context, and I just looked this up just now, so this is an accurate number as of today. The entire ACOTAR series, like all 3 books, or 4 I guess now, have sold 13 million copies worldwide. The original Hunger Games book had sold significantly more than the entire ACOTAR series just by the time that first movie came out. That's just the one book. That's insane. That is insane. 17.5 million copies and won a ton of awards. And in 2019, it was put on BBC's list of the 100 most influential books in the entire world. This video is insanely long by this point. I have no idea how long the other ones are going to be, how much I'm going to dive into them. I want to do a little bit more research into the impact and the different books it inspired and all of that. I also, in theory, am trying to get them all out by the time the movie comes out, but I just find that unrealistic. Because as of filming this, it comes out in almost exactly a month, and it took me a month to get to this point, and I still have to edit all this footage. So realistically, I might be able to get Catching Fire out, but I'm definitely not getting Mockingjay out by then. And then I kind of do want to read the prequel and also do a video on it because I haven't actually read it, so it'll be my first time reading it. So if any of that interests you, or if you find this concept interesting in general and want to see me do other book series, then subscribe and stick around. And I'll get Catching Fire out as soon as I can. But these take a while. Okay, bye!